Where's David?
Is David
What about
coming?
Bob?
David.
He's living the life. Mhm.
Am I live? Okay, let's call the meeting to order. Looks like we have a quorum. Okay. Do I have the minutes from the last meeting to approve? I don't see them in my packet.
No.
Are we not doing that today? No, okay. So if anyone does not have any additions to the agenda for today, if I could have a motion to approve it, please.
So moved.
Glenn has moved to approve the agenda. Do I have a second?
Oh,
Mark seconds it. All in favor?
aye.
Aye. Okay. Moving on to item number 3 of our agenda, the public comment. We've had 26 people sign up. We're very excited to be so popular. But once again, I made the mistake of letting people go a little long for the first half in the last meeting, and we ended up quite long. At 26 people with 3 minutes a person, that's an hour and a half. So I am going to enforce the 3-minute time limit. With that being said, Ken Fernandez, you're up. Oh, hey, Ken's in person. Hi,
Hey,
Ken.
how's everybody doing tonight?
Do we have his mic on, or is it live for the internet but not for us? Okay, so you're on the internet, but also speak up so we can hear you, please.
Okay, so most of you know me. I've been here in Cashiers for about 20 years. Member of the Cashiers Area Chamber for 10 years. I was president of that organization for 3. I was on the founding board of the Jackson County Travel and Development Authority. And when we merged from Cashiers to Jackson County and made one TDA. I'm also on the Highlands Cashiers Board of Realtors as their sitting president. I understand how time-consuming this is for all of you council members and volunteers. You have busy lives, you have businesses to run, and I really appreciate it, as well as the Jackson County Planning Department and all the representatives over there. At this point, I would like to state my support for the Cashiers Small Area Plan as presently written, my support of the proposed Hillside project, my support of the corrective removal of the 5,000 square foot minimum building size from the Cashiers Small Area Plan and the UDO. My support for adopting conditional use zoning. I've done my best over the last 20 years to participate in things that are going on, different opportunities to better serve the Cashiers area, to help guide, to become a place to work, live, love, visit, and thrive. One of the opportunities was years back participating in the Cashiers Area Small Plan, where we all participated in charrettes, surveys, group discussions with longtime stakeholders, second homeowners, realtors, business owners, you name it. A lot of people, I think over 400 people took place in that. The process took a long time and there's a lot of hard work, and it was finally adopted in March 19th, 2019. With all that said, when I was younger and faced with making a hard decision, my mom would always tell me to play the movie forward. What would happen if you did this? So I want you all to think in your heads, play the movie forward. Please think about what Cashiers will become if we put unrealistic expectations and limitations on future growth here in our village. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. Next on our list is Mr. Bill Horton. Bill, where are you? Anywhere?
Hey, greetings. Can you hear me?
Yep. All right.
Hello to the planning
Go
council.
ahead, Bill.
You hear me okay, Mike?
Yeah, you're good. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you for letting me speak. I'm a permanent resident here in Cashiers. Have been coming and living here, had a house here for over 30 years. I want to make 3 comments. First is at the 30,000 foot level, I'm in strong agreement with the general recommendations in Mr. Petrosky's report. Specifically, I do think we need particular and specific building size limits within the range he contemplates. I also agree with increasing limits on impervious surface and updates to the requirements for special use permit with particular attention to large scale developments and multi-unit developments. I'd like to focus attention for a minute on traffic. And I think the revisions to the UDO need to be made in the context of the realities of Cashiers today. We all know that traffic is a serious and escalating issue. We do not have any effective 107/64 bypass option on the horizon, particularly as it might relate to heavy construction traffic. And while the small area plan contemplates some type of connector, nothing specific yet exists. In addition to that, we have the application for the DOT for road widening or roundabout construction to be made. And that was all based on traffic analysis made prior to the recent explosion in growth that we've seen the last 2 years. So I think it's critical that the scale and timing of projects needs to be carefully managed in the context of our current traffic realities. There's nothing wrong with thoughtful and controlled growth at all. But can you imagine what would happen if the DOT started a road widening and roundabout project at the same time we started some type of large scale development very in close proximity to the crossroads? I think it would be a catastrophic event for the community for about 1 or 2 years probably. So with that in mind, I strongly urge the Planning Council to adopt Mr. Petrosky's recommendations as outlined in his short-term recommendation number 4 to increase the requirements for major developments when they apply for special use permit. I think it's appropriate for developments of a large scale to do significant homework ahead of time with detailed traffic impact analysis, as well as studies confirming water and sewage availability, presenting stormwater analysis and erosion mitigation plans. And I think those are things that should be essential for that type of project, particularly given the traffic situation we deal with today. And finally, I'm strongly also in favor of increasing the impervious surface changes that he recommended, moving from 70% to 50% or even more. And I'd suggest that the council strongly consider increasing those impervious surface requirements based on slope. I think steeper slopes deserve more significant restrictions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Horton. Next up on my list is Mary Palmer Dargan. Ms. Dargan, please go ahead. Oh, wait, we got to find her. Are you up? Okay, moving on then. Jack Cozart. Do we see it? Do we got a Jack in the room or on the internet?
I didn't sign up to speak. I just came down.
All right, moving on. Bud and Dina Litowitz.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, is this?
This is Bud Litowitz.
Okay, so last meeting we had some, just a second, Bud. Last meeting we had some couples that had signed up. Am I supposed to, I just want to know this for clarification, just as we try to get through this hour-and-a-half long list. Do I need to give each person 3 minutes? Can they get 3 minutes together?
No, I'll be the only one speaking today.
Okay, well, that I appreciate that, Bud, but I'm just going to get this answer for as I go down the list. Okay, all right, Bud.
Thank you.
Off you go, please, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Bud Litowitz, resident of Cashiers since 2013. And whether you choose to adopt a conditional zoning ordinance or special use permit process for major project submissions in the Cashiers commercial or village center areas, I think it's important to highlight your planning staff's and Jackson County Commission's own words from the Cashiers small area plan process and adoption in 2019, as well as those stated in the Unified Development Ordinance as it relates to those 2 districts. During the Cashiers small area plan public hearing and charrette process, by far the most likes was a picture contained in the final plan report of a pedestrian-oriented, low-rise, mixed-use village area, and it reflected the intent and character identified in your Unified Development Ordinance in both the Village Center and Cashiers General Commercial Districts as, quote, maintaining the traditional scale of development in the Village Center, unquote, and, quote, acknowledging the need to preserve the small town character of Cashiers, unquote. Maintaining the traditional scale of development and acknowledging the need to preserve the small town character of Cashiers are your words, not ours. And during the small area plan's adoption hearing, the County Commission Chairman McMahon said the plan was a, quote, guiding document about overall goals, unquote. And I believe the intent of these ordinances, public participation, and your County Commission's own words and plan adoption is clear. You should follow your words, address new development proposals regardless of the form in which they're presented for this area, and acknowledge the need to preserve the small town character of Cashiers and maintain the traditional scale of development, and honor the explicit intent as presented in both the Cashiers Small Area Plan and the Jackson County Unified Development Ordinance, or UDO. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Litowitz. Next on my list is Mr. Bill Pike. Bill, you up here? Okay. Bill, speak now. Okay. Moving on. Turner Insco. Turner? Mr. Insco, there.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, sir.
Go ahead, Turner.
As a representative of a landowner with properties both inside and outside of this village overlay, and a person with great passion for Cashiers, we care deeply about what happens and what is developed in the Cashiers core. Most recently, we were encouraged by the small area plan that was just mentioned and spent many hours in those meetings with other community members discussing the course forward. The conversation, in stark comparison to the dialogue presented here, was more robust around the 8,500 square foot limit. In fact, we strongly believe that the communities are meant to be guided by broader precepts and not analyze one brick at a time, such as a building size ordinance. If the council needs more information to counter the size constraint proposal, then I'm pretty confident these studies can be thoughtfully procured for your review. In the interim, I ask you to contemplate your role as a village council to manage the entire community's input and recognize there are likely many people who do not foresee a community of 8,500 square foot buildings as a robust community. The reality is the urban core should be a place that promotes community and is therefore more developed. Jackson County and Cashiers really do us many favors, and one of them is that it does not lend itself to being overly developed due to constraints around topography, resources like water and sewer, just to name a few. Where there is centralization of these resources, however, then development will and should happen. Cashiers is broadly on the map for many people, as we see from the current lack of home inventory in the market. So be prepared, but be thoughtful. We believe that with diversity in building sizes and shapes that at their core are designed to create life in its urban core and return those who desire a more solitude respite to their homes. Size constraints mean that the larger uses will land just outside of this core in a pattern without structure and form. So it's ironic, but strict control on form like size can lead to very real consequences that inhibit proper building scale, intriguing diversity, and walkability, which is also a core to the community fabric and what was in the small area plan. Larger satellite uses will still come, and they will dot the extremities of 107 and 64 and expand the web of traffic that strict rules were meant to alleviate. So as landowners in Cashiers, we do ask you to consider the size constraint proposed, but we would also suggest in favor of correcting the current incorrect reference to a 5,000 square foot maximum in the small area plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Insco. Next, Mr. Rick Bars. Rick? see, there.
Okay,
you're
I'm
unmuted.
here.
Okay, go. Can you hear us, Rick?
My name is Rick Bars, and
Go ahead.
my family has offered 31 acres for development to Stephen McCauley for his hillside project. He bases development on the Cashiers small area plan, and we support the Cashiers small area plan and support the removal of the 5,000 square foot maximum building size that was erroneously in the plan. I also support adopting conditional zoning. Even without regulatory oversight, my family has rejected a Lowe's project on that property and also a CVS on that site. We assembled this property for future development, and the future is now. We cannot produce a year-round village, activate it, and expand the village core, create a walkable village with buildings of less than 5,000 square feet. Please remove this restriction. The small area plan was established for the community, by the community, with lots of input just a couple years ago. We don't need a redo. Thank you. And I would like to offer
30 seconds.
my extra part of my 3 minutes to Donna when it's her turn.
Okay.
I'm through.
Okay. Donna? Where is she?
Yeah,
Okay. If you're gonna just
Hi,
use the rest
Mike.
of his, hey there, Donna. If you're gonna just use the rest of his 3 minutes, you have a minute and a half. Go for it.
no, I'm gonna use mine.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
Well,
Hello,
okay.
everybody.
Well, you signed up separately, so go for it.
Okay, my name is Donna Bars, and my husband is one of the 6 sellers for the Hillside Project. There's so many beautiful clubs that surround Cashiers. They're like small villages to me. The village center is the clubhouse, and numerous buildings cluster nearby, providing additional services, and then neighborhoods radiate away from the center. Why can't we grow Cashiers like that? Of course, downtown Cashiers would be public, not private. But think about it. Clubhouses are meeting halls and are large core structures. Some of these beautiful clubs have 3 and 4 stories and have square foot areas of 14,000 square feet, 22,000 square feet, 32,000 square feet, even 48,000 square feet. And there's a wish to limit the downtown commercial core structures to the size of a home. In my thinking, the downtown commercial district should be denser in the core. Many services are missing in Cashiers. Let's give them a place to be. Doctors' offices, services agencies, daycare, in-town living, restaurants, businesses which serve the public's needs. Personally, I think the project is a little too dense for me, but it will be scaled correctly, and the village center are denser by nature. Macaulay's plan offers so much more than density, though. A walkable downtown. Ever heard that on a wish list? Parking. Ever hear complaints about the lack of parking in Cashiers? What a neat idea to have hidden parking with a rooftop amenity. How fun would that be? The master plan calls for mountain vernacular buildings. Ever heard that wish before? How about a culinary school? What a perfect industry to bring to a resort town like Cashiers. Do we care about creating lasting jobs here, or is it lip service? How about employee housing? That was on our wish list too. There'll be places to congregate outside, inside, rooftop. Don't we want Cashiers to be a year-round destination? Currently, downtown Cashiers pretty much dries up after summer in the season. And in the winter, Cashiers practically closes down in January and February. Hillside Cashiers reflects many provisions of the community input workshop we had a couple of years ago. Finally, this development will showcase applied and efficient green technology. Doesn't that resonate with some of our environmental friends? Bringing synergy and personality and destination to Cashiers Town Center would be great for the public, be great for our current shopkeepers, and it would be great for job creation. walkability, and affordable infrastructure are byproducts of density. Putting a suburban overlay in the downtown commercial district, core district.
Donna, that's the end of your 3 minutes. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Can I have my husband's half a minute?
No, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on, Sam Lupus.
Hey, Mike, can you hear
Go
me?
ahead, Sam.
My name is Sam Lucas. I've lived in Cashiers since 1999, raised a family here, and I've been involved in many civic organizations. And I won't name them all because it's probably everyone in town, but and I am in the real estate business, for full disclosure. Although I wanted to let everybody know that I was very, very involved in the Mountain Landscapes Initiative back in '08. And a little less involved in the UDO and small area plan development. But, you know, one of the things I'm hearing in a lot of this, and I've been following this for a long time now, is, you know, I want to know where everybody was when we did all that work, because just because there's a project on the table doesn't mean that they're not taking into account all of the regulations and zoning issues that were considered during that period of time. The building size issue that's on the table right now, I think, is a massive planning mistake, and that the 5,000 square foot maximum is really just cover for, let's figure out how to not let these projects continue. You know, the size of a building, it's not an irrelevant issue, but it is irrelevant when it's placed within the forms of other structures. So large structures can fit very nicely into a small village like Cashiers if they're form-based structures designed around them, and it all fits to scale. If you stick a large building in the middle of nothing and it's going to sit out like a sore thumb. But if you design it correctly, again, the number of square feet in that building becomes pretty irrelevant at that point. So I'm opposed to this 5,000 square foot maximum. Also think that would be very restrictive from a civic perspective, because as this town grows, it's going to be more about the public realm and not about these private clubs that surround this village. And, you know, issues of where does the emergency management organization put their next facility? What if a new church wants to come to town? I know everybody's talking about differences between civic buildings and non-civic buildings, but it's not just civic buildings that make up a community. We need housing. Most of the houses that are in this town are built, they start larger than 5,000 square feet. So that number to me is really just a distraction that's being created by the people that are opposing this development. And finally, what I'd like to say is, what do you want? Because you need to be careful what you wish for here. Because saying we don't want this or we don't want that, what you get is what we currently have. And a lot of what we currently have,
Sam,
I took you around the room, you wouldn't be.
that's the end of your 3 minutes. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Next on my list is Mr. Walter Galtney. Walker, excuse me. What is it? Walker? There we go. Walker. If you could unmute yourself, sir. There you are. Can you hear us?
Great, thank you. I appreciate the time to be on board here. I believe what Sam said is exactly right. The misdirection here in order to stymie Cashiers has been around for a while. I've been in the area for over 20, 25 years. I've read Stephen Zoukas's comments. I agree with him 100%. I think you have to be careful. What you're treading on here is legal handcuffs that will handcuff the community. This 5,000 square feet, this misdirection to keep this project from happening is incorrect. I believe in doing it right. I believe in doing it responsibly. If you're going to limit the amount of square footage, then maybe we ought to go out and limit the amount of square footage that you can have in a house. if you're going to limit commercial people, well, let's go down and limit 2,500 square feet and 2 bedrooms. We'll see how well that works for a $300,000, $500,000 lot. You can't let some of these things happen. With the last 10 years, there's not been a new business, within a half mile of Cashiers that stuck around. You've only had a car wash and addition to the orchard, the liquor store. Tell me some things that happened in the last 10 plus years. These are things that people are using to make this stop, and this should not happen. There are other villages around the state that have not let this happen. And I think you're on soft sand here, that once you put this in effect, if you were to put this 5,000 square foot in effect, it will be years before anything else can happen here. And we need the housing, we need these different things to make it grow and happen. And there's just a small contingency with a large voice that's slowing this down. And it's not this development. It's been going on for 20 years. And I do appreciate the time to talk, and if we can get some other people in, people come up here and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. They bring their families up here, they bring their kids, they bring their wives, and within a short period of time, they're out of business. And this is not right. We've seen this not just for restaurants, almost all businesses. Unless you have a local business and own your building, you can't come up here and start anything. And this is just a prime example of being handcuffed. And if this goes through, you're going to see it like this forever and ever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Walker. Next on my list is Ben Demange. I don't know how to pronounce your last name, sir. Ben?
His internet service.
Okay. All right, so next after Ben is Ross Ellsbury. Right, no Ross. Next on my list is Tommy Smathers. Tommy in the room? No. Next is Mr. Stephen Zukas. Steve? When we unmute him.
There you go.
Can you
hear
us?
me? Good.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
I'm going to speak very briefly in opposition to the, or in support of correcting the 5,000 square foot thing. But I want to say that I stand in awe of the great presentations made by others speaking more broadly about the hillside plan and how it helps people other than a few special people who want to keep it as a bear sanctuary or something. It is clearly a mistake that this 5,000 square foot reference snuck in, and the Cashiers Planning Council, I'm sorry, the Cashiers Jackson County Planning Council or Committee has steadfastly ignored it, properly so. Even Mr. Jake Petrosky, who wrote that weird little memo about things about making the heart of town just like the suburban stuff around it, even he admits, quote, errors relating to the building size in the illustrations in question, and that in section 9.3 of the UDO, quote, it is silent on building size limits other than height. Moreover, the hillside project itself demonstrates why you don't want to impose these kind of limits. The plan for the project includes a corporate training center and 2 hotels, all of which will draw people to Cashiers year-round and put them on the streets of the village core, helping to address issues of walkability and seasonality. Multifamily housing also will help address the issue of housing affordability and again, put people on the street. These 3 building types, corporate training center, hotels, and multifamily, can't be produced in units of 5,000. In fact, not much can be done under 5,000 square feet other than single-family homes. Lack of walkability, a super short season, and lack of affordable housing are 3 issues raised in one fashion or another in the small area plan. And these these type of buildings are what's needed to make Cashiers work and to make it a better place and not just keep Cashiers. And I'd like to pen kind of a footnote to this presentation by saying that as seller, I have no control over what happens on the site. As it happens, I rather like what Macaulay proposed because it makes Cashiers a better place to visit, to live, to work, and to raise a family. Of course, there's room for improvement, as there is in all things. Maybe a few fewer residences, maybe a little less Italianate design. But the way to fix those problems is to sit down and talk with him. And there doesn't seem to be anybody opposed to this process or this project who's willing to talk to Macaulay. I found him actually to be a pretty reasonable guy. And I really think it would be in the interest of the community for people to sit down and try to work out what can be changed. If I were opposed to the hillside projects, that's certainly what I would do, because the problem is it's going to be sold. Sooner or later, it's going to be sold and you're going to get a new Macaulay.
Thank you, Steve. That's 3
You're
minutes.
welcome.
Thank you. Next on my list is Mr. Richard Ott. Mr. Ott.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay. No one is opposed to development per se, but like everything in life, the devil is in the details. And I think what those of us who were shocked to see a plan that would have provided for 1.25 million square feet in the central Cashiers area is just totally not in keeping with the Unified Development Ordinance, which in section 9.1 says to protect and conserve the heritage of Cashiers. And in section 9.3, in which specifically deals with the central district, it's about maintaining the traditional scale of the village center, and that is an important goal of the district. Not my words, but the words of the Unified Development Ordinance. If I think we had seen a project that had a scale that was in keeping with the quality and heritage of Cashiers, you wouldn't have seen this kind of what has been referred to as a small but vocal group. I can assure you it is not a small group. My wife and I have had a home here since 1988. And because of the heritage, in this past year, we made the decision to become permanent full-time residents. So I would simply ask the Cashiers Planning Council to remember what that heritage is and to preserve it. Again, we're not opposed. Those of us who were quite surprised at the scale of the projected development, we're not opposed to development, but it has to be in keeping with the traditional scale and ambiance of Cashiers. Those of us who live in the Cashiers area did not want to live in not even in Highlands. When one of the speakers has referred to downtown Cashiers, I'm not aware of any downtown Cashiers. There is a village center, but there's a difference between a village and a city. And with what's going on in the world today, there are those of us who want the ambiance and the heritage of Cashiers. And I simply hope that any development keeps that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ott. Next on my list is Miss Nicole Haler. Ms. Haler.
Good evening. I'm Nicole Haler, Director of the Chattooga Conservancy. I'm speaking on behalf of our members who live or own property in Jackson County, and also for those who value the outstanding resource waters that originate in the Chattooga River's headwaters in Cashiers. Heard a lot about development in the discussion so far. Haven't really heard a lot about impacts to the watershed. As we know, Cashiers sits at the very top of the Chattooga River watershed, and outstanding resource waters are extremely rare. And once they're gone forever. It's plain that the recent proposed development at the crossroads caused an uproar in the community, that many folks are keenly interested in maintaining the character of Cashiers and in moving forward as contemplated in the small area plan and in any business related to this. The Planning Council's discussion on this meeting's agenda, specifically about conditional zoning and building sites, is therefore of great interest. Though not on the agenda, I also understand that the Jackson County Planning Department will make a presentation to help inform the council's discussions. Listening to the public is a tedious, hard process, but after these presentations, I think it would be beneficial to have, more questions so people can really understand what's going on. The pressure to increase the scale and intensity of development in Cashiers is great. Potential changes to the special use permit, quasi-judicial hearing process, potential amendments to the Cashiers zoning ordinance, potential changes to the unified development ordinance, and all matters pertaining to scale and intensity of future development in Cashiers should be vetted, subject to public scrutiny, and decisions reached in a deliberative and completely transparent process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Haler. Next on my list is Mr. Jeff Schulman. Jeff? Not on my list. I mean, not on the call. Okay. Next, I have Miss Jamie Moran. I thought I saw her earlier. She's dropped off. Okay. Next on my list is Mr. Craig Pendergast. Pendergrast. He's right there.
I'm here. Sorry, I'm here. I just was taking a while to figure
Go
out
ahead,
how.
Craig.
Okay, just 1 second. All right. My comments today were planned to really be about what the Planning Council is going to be doing later in the meeting with Mike Poston of the Planning Department. And then that is working towards a better crafted, better set of predictable and numeric standards when it comes to building size, lot coverage, and the nitty gritty of zoning. The Cashiers ordinance, as it stands, has a narrative standard which says buildings shall be small in scale, and that's consistent with the small area plan. But it leaves room for some uncertainty in terms of what is, what that it means. It is enforceable, but it's also would be helpful for both developers and for the community and the Planning Council to have some numbers to be working with. And yeah, I came in a little bit late, but I heard it sounded like a lot of folks were talking about this all in the context of the Macaulay proposal, and that's not what I think is on the table here. What is on the table is getting this ordinance right. And I'm looking forward to hearing what the planning department says in the way of possible options. But it is critical to have actual building size numeric limits in the context of floor area ratio and lot coverage limits, impervious surface criteria that take into account the what is the village core as defined in the plan, and then as compared to other areas more distance, and which take into account topography, which is so important in Cashiers. And also as we go forward into whether it's conditional zoning or continuation of the quasi-judicial process, that we make sure that the applications that are filed for major developments are complete and have all of the pieces of information necessary to consider the development. One of the reasons Cashiers hasn't grown is because of its natural constraints. And those natural constraints are not going away with the swipe of a hand. Topography matters, and water supply matters, traffic matters right now. If and incremental growth matters, but if you were to put a giant project in right now, there's just not the capacity to handle it. So as you look at this, at the zoning revisions, I suggest you think in terms of what is
Mr.
here and now.
Prendergast, that's your 3 minutes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on my list is Mr. Ralph Gaines III. Is Mr. Gaines on the call? Janet, Miss Janet Martin. Janet, can you hear us?
I sure can. Thank you
Okay.
so much for allowing me to speak. I am very, very much in favor of the small area plan as well as the hillside project, but I'm speaking more from a small business owner's standpoint. I have had the pleasure of opening a dog store that I was told the first day my first customer came in and said I would never make it, which was really positive. Since then, the store has stayed in the same place for the past 10 years, grooms a number of dogs. We sell pretty much anything your dogs could want. It has become kind of the center for the dog community. The problem we have is we need more groomers. We turned away in the last summer season over 600 dogs that wanted to be groomed. So the reason for the lack of being able to get help up here is they cannot afford to live up here. With regards to the hillside project, something has to give. We've got to have a walkable town. During the summer, I remain open 7 days a week. I get so many customers that will come in and thank me for being open, because you get a lot of people here on the weekends, and for the majority of businesses are closed on Sunday. I do extremely well. It is about, I think what sets us up, well, how do I want to say this? With Cashiers, the people that come here that are here for the first time and fall in love with it, we don't have a public restroom. So my store has become the public restroom. They don't, I find families walking up and down 107 that I am scared to death one day a little child is going to just bolt because we don't really have a sidewalk. Our people here do not, and I watch it constantly, do not really adhere to the crosswalk. If there's going to be an accident at some point, we've got to make this a walkable town. And what else did I want to say? Hang on. So I didn't write it down. I just have notes. I am open year round, 6 days a week, and then 7 in the season. I've talked about walkability, public restrooms, Sundays, being open on Sundays in the season. There is really no central map or signage to even allow pedestrians to see where the businesses are, and what is being offered. It was a shame that the space that's now TJ Bailey's, it was not their fault, but the prior person that leased the store. Yeah.
Ms.
Oh,
Martin.
shoot.
Ms.
Okay.
Martin, that's the end of your 3 minutes. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, next on my list is Mr. Stephen McCauley. Okay, Stephen's not speaking. Are we attempting to unmute him now? Okay. So right now we're assuming Mr. McCauley has elected not to speak. Next on my list is Mr. Ben Harris.
Can you hear me, Michael?
Yes, please go ahead, Ben.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am speaking on behalf of the Cashiers Chamber of Commerce and reading a prepared statement from the board. Mr. Chairman and council members, as independent business owners and leaders of the Cashiers Area Chamber, whose core purpose includes service as a conduit for responsible growth, We have followed the council's work on the Cashiers area planning and other development considerations with interest. Our organization was intimately involved with the creation of the Cashiers Small Area Plan, facilitating business and community input and coordination with NCDOT, regional and Jackson County planning initiatives. The Chamber's economic development commitment is to support future growth, which enhances our destination appeal and the quality of life we enjoy in Cashiers. This encompasses new or expanded commercial enterprises, such as retail, restaurant, or other services, residential and visitor accommodations, public amenities, recreational opportunities, pedestrian-friendly and environmentally sensitive public infrastructure, green space, and more aligned with the character of our community. Given the council's upcoming review of zoning, size, and height restrictions and other changes for possible text amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance, we are increasingly concerned that without careful study of the opportunities and consequences of codifying actions, we risk irrevocably injuring our community's ability to attract responsible developers and investment. We believe we must work in partnership toward measured economic expansion and sustainability, and it is critical that we do so thoughtfully in due course. To act in haste will be a disservice to the many who participated in the deliberate process and significant work on these issues over the years. We look forward to the Planning Department's presentation on April 26th under agenda items, conditioning, zoning discussion, and building size discussion to learn more about these subjects, and then to the council allowing a full discussion in the future about prudent next steps. We urge you to withhold taking specific action at this meeting to refer UDO or other changes to the Jackson County Planning Board until all stakeholders, especially the business community, which has substantial investments and commitments here, and expert resources have the opportunity to thoroughly review any proposed changes. The Chamber represents 460 businesses, nonprofit, and associate members in the Cashiers area. We, as members of the board, have a responsibility to them and others to engage appropriately in this discussion, which impacts the community's vitality and economic success. Thank you for considering our concerns and for your leadership.
Thank you very much, Ben. All right, next on my list is Miss Maria Partlow. Maria?
Hello? You hear me?
Yes, please go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. Listening to all of this and in conversations I've had with others, it's clear that there has to be some meeting in the middle on this, the proponents of the Cashiers Hillside and those of us who have a different view. But I believe that's what the consultant is proposing, and it's a viable plan that needs the full consideration of the Planning Council and the county. And we also need to take time because we have new council members about to come on board, and they need to get up to speed and understand this. I also personally have a lot of trouble with folks telling us what Cashiers needs when they're going to make a ton of money on land sales and real estate commissions. I support Mr. Horton, Mr. Pendergrass, and Mr. Ott's comments fully. And I implore the council to think this through, take your time, and do this with thought of decades to come. I believe in keep Cashiers Cashiers. It's not a trite comment like Mr. Zukas referred to. It doesn't mean same old, same old. It means character. It means quality of life. It means our environment, all the reasons we live here and love it, and why we have a real estate boom now. And a lot of people are making money on that. So we want responsible development. That's what Develop Cashiers Responsibly is all about. Responsible development. We know it's going to happen. Let's do it right. So let's think this through. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Ms. Partlow. Yes. Okay, and who's Rad's iPhone? Well, we let him in. Let's ask him who he is.
That's Ralph Gaines III.
Okay. All right, well, let's let these three gentlemen who might have had some technical difficulties speak. Let's see if Bill would like to speak. Bill? Mr. Bill Pike?
Good afternoon. Bill Pike. I'm a local real estate developer. Recently did Highlands Cove and also the condo project, Chattooga Ridge. My first trip to Highlands was in June of 1981. And I was up here to attend a meeting for golf course owners in the Southeast at High Hampton. I met several local developers from Highlands Country Club, Highlands Falls, Wildcat. Of course, this was the day before William McKee developed Wade Hampton. The same thing was talking about up here then. The locals were not embracing the developments. The environmental people were coming in at the time. And then you've got a group of developers. And the thing that was being talked about then is, hey, once I get here, let's put a gate over 64 and we don't need anybody else here. And that was 40 years ago. And that's the same thing we're talking about today. Once I've got my place, let's don't let anybody else come up here. Well, we all know if that had happened 40 years ago, we would not have a hospital. We would not have a large Ingles grocery store. I know the county's thinking about putting in some more water and sewer. That wouldn't be considered. I think with the help of the state and the county and great engineers, we can continue to develop Highlands. We're surrounded by millions of acres of federal land called the Nantahala National Forest. We're not being pinched by land because government owns 90% of it around us. But as we all know, the biggest beneficiary of the development of the Highlands Cashiers Plateau have been the local folks. And not only the landowners, but those people that have better jobs. We have 2 or 3 great schools here that you can choose to send your children to. And I just think that we've got to approach this thing that there's got to be other people with the same access that people had in 1935.
Mr. Pike?
Yes, sir.
Mike, that's your 3 minutes. Thank you very much, sir.
Can I take up collection?
Thank you. All right. Next, Mr. Jeff Schulman. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. I only have a minute, so I'll give back 2 of my minutes. And I respect what Mr. Pike said around development. I think there's a significant difference between building individual developments over a course of 40 years and dumping hundreds of units in the middle of the crossroads. There's no infrastructure to support it. Just this morning, they were doing some paving on the road, and it's a Monday, and it took me 25 minutes to get to Ingalls from Lonesome Valley. Like, what is the impact going to be if a development of this size and scale gets dumped right in the middle of that crossroads? How are you going to handle it? How are you going to handle the traffic? Won't be able to get to the hospital that Mr. Pike talks about. It'll take you 3 hours. I believe in responsible development. I'm a beneficiary of what you guys have built. Made several real estate investments here over the past year and a half and done tremendously well by it, but it's because it's what it is. It's a beautiful, laid back. People come here to have quiet and peace and escape traffic jams like they have in Atlanta and other large cities. And what they're proposing is not sustainable development over 40 years. It's a big bang theory that's going to blow up the quality of everybody's life here. And I need to jump to another call, but thank you for giving me a few minutes to talk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schulman. Next on my list, I believe last is Ralph Gaines III is Rad's iPhone. Mr. Gaines? Are we trying? We click it, does it signal him or something? Yeah. Okay. I'll give him 30 more seconds and then we're going to close public. Is there anyone else that was on the list that we missed?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. I'm unmuted.
Okay.
Can you hear me? This Rad Gaines. I'm sorry.
Okay, please go ahead, Mr. Gaines.
Okay, my family's been coming to Cashiers since 1982. I've watched the growth since then, back when it was a yellow traffic light at the crossroads. I support what the folks that have been putting this thing together now for what I understand is a long time, because what I see is a lack of people coming back to Cashiers that want to, that grew up there and they want to work there and they want to stay there and raise their families there. I think I read something recently where the median age of the resident up in Cashiers is 64. Whereas you compare with other areas, it's much less lower than that. And I think that's one reason a lot of us have difficulty, although the service we get from the locals with the various businesses we need is outstanding. We're still waiting 12 and 13 weeks, a non-COVID related matter, just to have something installed in a home that we bought. So I think the people that are trying to put this together will use their heads. There will be some traffic issues that they will work out. And I support the plans that I've seen. And I think the zoning will be worked out appropriately. I think this project has been in the works for a long, long time. I think it's needed. I don't think it's going to be overrun like Atlanta that was mentioned. Will the issues and problems? Yes. But if it will bring about a tax structure that helps the entire county and helps those people who are growing up there now and say, hey, this isn't a bad place to live. Maybe I will come back here and work and raise my family as opposed to going elsewhere. I grew up in Talladega, Alabama. I watched that happen to that little town there. It's splintered and it's down to nothing now because no one goes home. So I appreciate your time for letting me speak, and I'll sit back and watch and see what happens.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gaines.
All right. Thank you.
If there's no one else, we'll now close the public comment. And very good job, everyone. We got that done in only 1 hour. Let's take a quick 5-minute recess, and then we'll pick up with number 4, new business, special use permit, Grouse Point Phase 3.
I mean, that's pretty small. Yeah. Yeah.
Glenn, once you get settled, we'll call it back to order.
Yes, it is. That's right.
Everyone good to go? Yeah. Okay, let's call the meeting back to order. It's, what do we got here? 6:06. All right, now picking back up at new business. Can you hear me all right? My mic on correctly? Okay. New business, 4A, the special use permit for Grouse Point Phase 3. A quasi judicial hearing is an evidentiary hearing where the Cashiers Area Planning Council will make a decision based solely on the competent material and substantial evidence in the record. The record is all the materials and input presented to the council, including the application, exhibits, testimony, and related materials. The record may include some insufficient evidence, but the council may not base its decision on it. The procedures provided here are not meant to be binding rules, but to be flexible guidance for the conduct of the hearing. Okay. So I'm now going to open the hearing as advertised. And next, are there any party, wait, sorry. Members of the council, we now have to make our disclosures. Members of the Cashiers Area Community Planning Council shall disclose any site visits, ex parte communication with any person, including county staff, consultant, specialized knowledge related to the case, fixed opinion on the case, family business, or other similar relations with the applicant or other affected person, financial interest in the outcome, or any other relevant information. Does anyone have any specific disclosures? I mean, I know we all know Mike. I know Mike and I work with him. I've worked with him in a real estate capacity. I have no current deals with him or any other relationship to this property, but I certainly walk across it when I walk around Cashiers. And I did ask the county what the situation with the sidewalk that we had, that was part of a previous approval at this site. But other than that, I have no other disclosures. I don't feel that that rises to the level of recusal, since no one else has any disclosures.
I do have a disclosure. I deal with Mike in business. I sell him building products and materials, and I would profit off of selling lumber or something like that to that site over there. But
okay. I mean, do you think you'd be able to make a neutral decision based on this?
Absolutely, I would be able to make a mutual.
Heather, your thoughts?
So David, are you saying that you would have a financial interest in this project?
I would.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Yes, I would.
Oh, yeah, that's a reason for him to be recused from this hearing. You know, fortunately, I haven't heard disclosures from the remainder of you, but there's enough here to still continue with the hearing if David excuses himself from the vote, since he would have a financial interest.
Okay. So do we need to make a motion or a vote for David to recuse himself, or if he offers to recuse himself, is that sufficient?
If he offers and then it's accepted by the council, that would be sufficient.
Can it be accepted with just by affirmation without a vote?
Yes, because it's
Okay.
not.
David, are you willing to recuse yourself? Yes. Okay. All right. Moving on. If none of the other council members have any disclosures, particular disclosures, no. Number 4, parties. The chairman of the Cashiers Area Community Planning Council will inquire if there's anyone other than the applicant and the county staff who wants to be a party to this action. Anyone other than the applicant or county staff who wants to be a party to this action must have standing as defined in the statute. Is there anyone that has applied to be a party to this action or wishes to state their case?
I have. Turner Insco.
Ann Self with the Village Green.
Sue Lewis, Chair of Village Green.
Okay. And now both Turner and the Village Green are both adjoiners, and you both received letters from the planning, the Jackson County Planning, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, Mr. Poston, what was the standard that we're using, or Heather, whoever would like to field this one? Just to remind the council members who are taking.
It's proximity and special damages, so that they would suffer a special damage potentially more than the general public. So if there's a concern about stormwater, runoff, traffic, and anything, other than something that would affect everybody coming into the area, that along with proximity is what gets you the standing referred to as special damages. So if they could, Ann or Turner, if you could just state what special damages you could potentially suffer as an adjoining property to this, not necessarily, that you are going to, but what could happen, that would help get you there as a party withstanding.
Okay, Turner, I'll throw it to you first since Ann's seated. Turner, do you have any other claims of potential special damages that would?
Sure. Cashiers Canoe Club Development LLC is the sole member of the Lake Association. Lake Association is the manager of Cashiers Lake, and the upstream stormwater impacts on Cashiers Lake, if not properly managed, could have a negative impact on the lake.
Okay, thank you, Turner. In our previous hearings, we did vote person by person on standing. Is that correct, Heather? Is that necessary in this hearing, which is not as large in scale?
Well, since you just have two of them, I think you can do it either way. You could vote on either one individually or vote together.
Okay, let's just hear from you, Ann. What, or Madam President of the Village Green.
So speaking for the Village Green, our concerns would be similar to Mr. Insco, stormwater impacts and also potentially traffic.
Okay.
In the area.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Self. If I could have a motion to either accept or deny these people individually or together, I would like to hear that motion now from a member of the council who's taken part in this quasi judicial hearing. So we could either say both of them are in, both of them are out, make a motion saying this one's in, make a motion saying that one's in. I just need someone to give me a motion.
Motion to approve those.
Okay, so
Parties as
a party withstanding. So Mr. Ubertino has made a motion to accept both Turner Insco from the Cashiers Canoe Club LLC and Self from the representing the Village Green as parties withstanding. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, so I heard Robin and I saw Debbie, so I'll take Robin as the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous. Okay. So now I move on to number 5, swearing in. All persons, including county staff, consultants who intend to present evidence shall be sworn in, and this also will include the applicant and parties, correct, Heather? Yes, okay. If y'all would stand or affirm. Do you affirm that the evidence you shall give to the board in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Do you so affirm? Yes. Okay. All right, moving on to section 6, procedure for the quasi judicial hearing, evidence. 6A is the presentation of the staff report. I believe that'll be Mr. John Jelenevsky from the county.
Good evening, Planning Council. Tonight, we're going to be reviewing a special use permit request for Grouse Point Phase 3. The applicant is Grouse Point LLC. Location is 188 Burn Street in Cashiers, PIN number 7572400752. In relationship to where this property is to the crossroads. Here's the crossroads here, 107 and 64, Frank Allen Road, and this highlighted box is where the property is. The district zone is Village Center. The summary is that the applicant is proposing the construction of an approximately 3,684 square foot retail office building. That's going to be approximately 3,300 square feet on the first floor and 384 square feet on the second floor. The location of this project, proposed project, is on the north side of Frank Allen Road near the Frank Allen Burn Street intersection and approximately 462 linear feet west of Highway 107. So 462 feet from that intersection, and the building location is in the back of the property right here. The total area of the property is 0.71 acres and it has an average slope of less than 1%. The proposed structure exterior will be traditional board and batten siding with rustic metal roofing. I'll jump ahead to the elevations and hopefully you can make that out. So board and batten on the main field of the building, and you have architectural metal roof accents. The proposed architectural features will be in harmony with the existing newly constructed professional office on the adjacent property. You may remember you have two approvals behind you on this property. There was Grosse Point Phase 1, which is complete. That's on the corner here. And then the applicant is going to be starting the previous approved project, which is in that corner. All new perimeter and exterior landscaping will meet or exceed meet or exceed the Cashiers Development Ordinance regulations for species and buffering. The ingress and egress to this property will be from Frank Allen Road and Burn Street. Here is a site plan showing the entrance to Burn Street here, access, and then of course off of Frank Allen Road. The immediate surrounding properties are a mix of commercial, residential, and community uses. That would be library, post office, rec center, and village green uses. This proposed retail office space will use the existing shared parking on site as the applicant owns the adjacent parcels. So this parcel and this parcel are also under the management of the applicant. And there, you could see by the proposed property lines here, this would all be shared parking amongst the three professional buildings and office space. Utility service will be provided by Tuckasegee Water and Sewer Authority, and the Jackson County has a small water system up here that the applicant has approval for an agreement with the county to use. Fire protection will be provided by the Cashiers Fire Department. So in this case, the Jackson County Unified Development Ordinance is applied. And that's Article 9, which is in the regulated district section. 9.3 is the Cashiers commercial area. The first section 9.3.5 is the site and building design standards and building architecture. The first section, letter B, speaks to materials, building materials and color. All buildings shall be constructed of stone, exposed timber, fiber cement siding, wood siding, shingle siding, or other high-quality material as approved by the Design Review Committee, which you all sit as. No building shall be covered with sheet or corrugated metal or vinyl siding. And as you could tell by the elevations here, that the proposed exterior siding material will be traditional board and batten, and the siding materials will continue down to the masonry foundation, which would be a slab. Number 2, existing or exterior building material shall be continued to the finished grade of any elevation. Again, this is a slab on grade. Materials will be continued down to the slab elevation or just a little bit above, depending on manufacturer specifications. Cornices shall be constructed of brick, stone, wood, precast concrete, or other high quality, long lasting material. And the proposed building materials will comply with this standard. Architectural accent materials located above the roof line et cetera, must be, same materials must be used. In this case, the siding materials above the main roof line will be traditional board and batten, meaning that there is obviously the main roof line here, and here you could see that the board and batten has continued for the siding here and then in between the windows in both cases. Roman numeral 2 in that section, colors. Color schemes used for buildings shall be aesthetically integrate building elements together, relate separate freestanding buildings on the same lot or parcel to each other, and be used to enhance the architectural form of the building. And the applicant has stated that the exterior colors for the proposed structure will be traditional colors suggested, such as historic whites, grays, browns, and colors from the rustic palette, and will be in harmony with the previously approved constructed professional office on site. And you all probably have seen the existing building there, which is mainly a white building, dark trim. The applicant is proposing on carrying that same color palette, not necessarily white, but the suggested colors in the ordinance. Exterior colors for new buildings and structures, including roofs. Of course, the applicant has stated that the colors for the trim and the field of the building will be in the suggested historic Cashiers palette. All building projections, including but not limited to chimneys, flues, vents, and gutters, shall match or complement the color, permanent color of the surface of which they project. The applicant has stated, obviously, that he will do this with the color palette suggested. Letter C in that section, building massing and configuration, building scale. Buildings shall be small in scale and shall not exceed 45 feet in height. Buildings located on steep areas shall conform to the hillside topography by stepping or staggering the mass of the proposed structure up or down the slope. This proposed structure will not exceed 35 feet in height. And if you're familiar with the property, again, it is relatively flat all the way across it. Visibility, building masses shall maintain the balance of scale and proportion using design components which are harmonious with natural landforms and landscaping. The property where this proposed structure will be constructed is relatively flat, and it appears that this building would comply with the standard. Letter B in that section, proposed structures shall not be sited atop peaks, etc. Again, this property is relatively flat and not a hillside nearby. Letter C, retaining walls visible from the valley floor, etc. That's not applied here. It's again, flat site. Letter D, building facade and character. Building scale. At least 4 of the following elements must comprise 50% of the front facade length, and at least 2 of the following elements must comprise of 30% of any facade length fronting a major public street or parking lot. And you have that menu there in front of you of a number of different items that can be used for the aesthetics of the building. You can see from the elevations shown that the applicant is showing outdoor patios, arcades, overhangs. There will be changes in texture of the building itself. You do have a covered porch, roof line offsets. There's different roof lines. You could see from the side elevations, the different pitches here with the shed roofs on the front, on the sides, and then of course the difference in the center of the building there with the different roof lines. Obviously, this building has many doors and windows. This is the front elevation that would be facing the parking lot. And looking at this right here, there's a lot of glass across the face of that building. So you could see here, these are large glass windows that would be facing the parking lot area. And then on the rear of the building, there are windows. But obviously that's facing the back of the property. So the ordinance is only talking about facing parking lots and rights of way. Number 3 in that section. First, let me go back. The proposed structure does include at least 4 of the elements listed in that menu. Number 3, windows, front of the building facade must be comprised of minimum of 30% window or glazed area. And the front facade of the proposed structure includes at least 30%. It is, it's quite loaded with glazed area across the front and including the windows in the upper floor there as well. All sides of the building shall include articulation, materials, and design characteristics consistent with those of the primary front facade. Again, you could see kind of it's a barn, kind of a post and beam barn look. It's carried over into the different elevations of the building on the sides and across the rear with the board and batten and barn doors on the back. This proposed structure complies with this ordinance standard. Letter E, in that section, roof form and articulation, any roof, the roof of any building shall be present a distinctive profile and add interest to larger buildings and complement the character of other buildings included on the same lot or parcel. And this proposed structure complies with this ordinance standard and complements the previously approved structures on the property in style and character. You may remember the previously approved projects, the one that's been complete fits in the character of this. This would be the largest building on the relative to the property. Keep in mind that these will be separate tracks, although they are tied together with style. Flat roof buildings does not apply. Parapets do not apply. Slope roof buildings. Obviously, we have a sloped roof building here, traditional. Sloped roofs that do not exceed the average height of the supporting walls with an average slope greater than or equal to 5:1 pitch. These pitches are greater. You do have the shed roofs that are probably, I can't quite make that out, but I think they are 512. And then the main roof line looks to be about a 1212 and the upper roof as well. Number 3, additional requirements. Consistent roof treatments, whether flat or sloping, shall be provided on all sides of the building. And the proposed structure complies with this standard. So they're doing metal roof treatments on all of the sides and the shed roofs. Roof equipment screening. There is no roof equipment proposed on this project, obviously because of the slope of the building roof line. G, franchise architecture does not apply. And H, architectural unity. All buildings within the same lot or parcel shall be architecturally unified. Architectural unity means that the building shall be related and compatible in style, color, scheme, quality, and type of exterior building materials. And the proposed structure will be aesthetically similar to the existing structure on the property or adjacent property. The review process, this proposed building for this project will exceed the 1,500 square foot threshold for staff approval and must be reviewed by you, the Planning Council, for special use permit. In order to issue this special use permit, the Planning Council must find the proposed design complies with design standards set forth in section 9.3.5, which is the site and building design standards of the regulated district in the UDO. The next section, 3.7.15, are the tenants that you'll be looking at here in a few minutes. I'll jump down to staff review. The submitted concept plans appear to indicate that the proposed uses and structures would meet the standards set forth in section 9.3.5, which is the site and building design standards of the Cashiers Commercial Area Regulated District. Approval of the design shown as recommended is recommended by the planning staff with the following conditions to be considered by the Planning Council. And that is that the applicant work with the planning department staff for final approval of the architectural plans, site design, stormwater, and landscape plans, and comply with site construction requirements for the entire project. Staff recommendation for you would be approve the proposed Grouse Point Phase 3 project application based on the site and building design standards reviewed by staff reviewed and staff conditions identified above. This recommendation is hereby submitted to the Cashiers Planning Council for review, special use permit standards. That's all I have, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions. Mr. Benitez, the applicant, is here to present as well if he needs to.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Jelinevsky. Mr. Benitez, do you have any questions for Mr. Jelinevsky? Okay, are there any questions from the Cashiers Area Planning Council or from the county attorney for Mr. Jelinevsky? No. Okay. Mr. Benitez, would you like to?
Mr. Cox, don't forget, you've got two parties withstanding that can also ask questions.
Oh, excuse me. Would either of the parties that have standing like to ask any questions of Mr. Jelinevsky regarding the staff report?
This is Turner Ansco, and have more of a statement than a series of questions, just an element to be added to this review. So as a neighbor to the Grouse Point Project Phase 3, we have reviewed the staff report, and conceptually, we definitely support the applicant's proposed building and use on the site. We did note, however, that there's not a stormwater management plan or commentary in this staff report. So given that the proposed project abuts Frank Allen Road and the stormwater will drain into Cashiers Lake, we'd like to clearly understand the plan, the notes and elements impacting the stormwater drainage, both during development and thereafter. So this is all a result of the fact that we're working on a very expensive maintenance dredging plan in Cashiers Lake due to years of unmanaged erosion issues upstream. And we believe that a plan with our understanding and input is essential for its continued health and maintenance. The applicant has properly completed the staff report from what we can tell, but we ask that additional review of the stormwater management with our participation be added both here and before final approval and permitting is complete on Grouse Point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
yes, go ahead, Mr. Jelinevsky.
So what's before you is remember, you're the architectural review committee for,
Yes.
so you approve these and attaching that to the special use permit standards is what we're reviewing. Of course, the ordinance is loaded with other regulations that are embedded in the ordinance that will be reviewed at final site construction plan before zoning permit is issued. That is not something that the council reviews. That's in the ordinance and is required for zoning permit. A little different process and administrative.
So that'll be available to the parties as part of public record once they get to that step with the building department?
Yes. So we already, on our way up here, I was copied on an email from Mr. Benitez that his design professional had already sent a copy of their stormwater plan to our erosion control permit, our officer for review. And that is tied up with the zoning approval as well. So it's because it's part of the zoning requirements of our review administratively, not only with the building materials, but when we talk about parking schedule, stormwater, landscaping, all that other stuff that is on the final plan, that's what we would review. Our erosion control officers are part of that. They're looking at stormwater and erosion.
Understood. Okay.
With that understanding, thank you, John. That makes all the sense in the world and understand that. Just want to make sure that the applicant understands that we surely would like to be involved in that process. We, like I said, spent a lot of time on this, the dredging plan, and have some ideas on how that hydrology works, and just want to make sure there's potential for us to be included in that before it hits the final permit review.
And as a footnote to that, I'd like to add that you remember the building that was there. So the pre and post impervious surface is a wash. So it's technically not creating any more than historically what was on that site. However, again, our erosion control folks and stormwater folks will be reviewing that.
I'm sure if Turner provides any anything to you, you'll provide it to the applicant,
Sure.
correct?
Mhm.
And we can make sure that they're in touch with each other.
I think,
Heather, do you have any thoughts on this? Them being involved in the erosion control, is this beyond us?
Well, as Mr. Jeleneski mentioned, it is, part of our ordinance, and so that is going to be required. And you can make it a condition if you want. It's already part of the ordinance, but it doesn't mean that it would be doubling up, but you could do that. But as he said, it is already part of the ordinance and in plan.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Turner, do you have any further questions for John?
No, thank you.
Okay. And do you have any questions? Okay. Let's move on to 6B, the applicant presentation of evidence and witnesses. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Was there any, John, I didn't mean to, all right, I got ahead of myself because I didn't know if the council had any questions for you at this time. Just, the only question I had is that just because it is active, ongoing interest for me, that the front of it was 30% glazed, the front
yeah.
side of the building.
Yeah, it's greater than that. You
And
couldn't
now
tell
we-
by those pictures, but there are large glazed areas because it's like a showroom retail space in there. It appears that there are basically floor to ceiling or floor to, on that interior walkway area that's covered, that's mostly glazed.
And then my further question is, obviously, we had approved the front building and there's now a sidewalk going in, and a sidewalk will go in with Grouse Point Phase 2. This was a separate parcel number. Did we, as part of the review process, require any additional sidewalk to be built as part of this building being built on parcel C?
No, we did not. That staff were not recommending that just because it's maintained by the state, but it's gravel road. So
Burn Street is gravel road?
yeah,
Mhm.
it's a state road.
I had
So
no idea. That was
what would be required would be curb and gutter, and there's nowhere for that stormwater. It's going to be collected and dammed before it goes anywhere. And I believe, and we had talked about that in previous meetings about, when the sidewalk requirement came in, that we were really focused on the paved thoroughfares, because with that comes more stormwater. The state's going to require stormwater, curb and gutter, et cetera. So that's why we were focused more on that than the gravel roads that the state maintains.
All right, very good. Does anyone else have any questions for John? No. Sorry for getting things out of order. Okay, now we're for serious this time, moving on to 6B. Mr. Benitez, do you have any evidence to present?
Only that I would say that we are reconstructing or building effectively a new building on the exact same footprint that was previously there. So we tore down what most people would consider a fairly unsightly building and are upgrading, but we are not increasing the impervious area. We're building exactly on the same footprint that was there previously.
Okay.
And there is a sidewalk or covered walkway in front. So you could argue there is pedestrian sidewalk in front of the building. It is covered.
Okay. Are there any questions for the applicant from those folks that we've admitted as parties to this action? Turner, do you have any questions for Mr. Benitez?
No,
Mr.
thank you.
Insco? I didn't hear him.
Excuse me, none. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Self, any questions? No? Okay. Are there any questions for the applicant from the Cashiers Area Planning Council or the county attorney? Any questions about the plans in front of us from the Planning Council? I'd just like to say it looks like a really good building, and I really like in Cashiers the covered front walkways because of the amount of rain we get. I think it's really handy.
Yeah, definitely an improvement over the previous.
Previous vacant building. All right. Okay, so moving on, if there are no questions from, any other questions from the planning council or county attorney, to 6C, the parties that we admitted as parties withstanding, excuse me, it's my phone. Is there any presentation of evidence? Turner, do you have any evidence that you would like to enter into the record?
No, sir.
Drinsko?
Thank you.
And do you have any evidence you'd like to enter into the record? Okay. If there's no new evidence, we get to skip the next two, right? We don't have to ask that. All right. So there's no questions by the applicant of the parties or questions from the Cashiers Area Planning Council of the parties. Moving on to 6D, the rebuttal. Would you care to make any rebuttal of evidence that's been presented? Yeah. Okay. And the parties that we've admitted to this action, would you make any rebuttal of evidence presented? Turner, Mr. Insko, Ann says no. Mr. Insko?
No, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Moving on to 6E, in my little sheet I'm following here. Closing statements. Everyone is allowed 5 minutes. Each party who presented evidence may give 5 minutes or less of a closing statement, followed by questions from the planning council. Mr. Benitez, would you care to have any closing statement? No. Mr. Insko?
No, sir. Thank you.
Ms. El? No. Okay. If there's no closing statements, then we'll move on to number 7 in my sheet, board discussion. This ends the public input section of the hearing. The Cashiers Area Community Planning Council will discuss the application, whether it meets the requirements set forth in the application ordinance, and make findings relevant to each of these factors based on the evidence and testimony presented. The county staff will be available to guide the Board of Commissioners through the standards of the ordinance. Findings shall be made on each applicable requirement and standard. The applicable ordinance for this hearing is the Unified Development Ordinance, and the requirements set forth in Article 3, Section 3715D, Special Use Permits, and Article 9, Section 9.3. Where's my little cheat sheet? Oh yeah, that's where it is. Thank you. All right. So this is my checklist for the special use permit. So the first, number 1 is that with the design review committee can find that the proposed development complies with Article 9 of the Unified Development Ordinance standards, or that we can make revisions. I think we've stated a little earlier that we thought this was a really good looking building in keeping with the other buildings on the site. Do we need to vote on this, Heather, or can we just do it by affirmation?
Yes, you do need to vote on each one, and we're here to guide you through these. Please, if you will, make findings on each one. And I think Mr. Poston can talk to you about what you usually do with design review.
Well, I think we also, if it's not already, we're going to add the staff report into evidence.
Correct.
And we're going to cite the evidence provided by the staff report and our findings.
You absolutely can.
Okay. Anything else in addition to
No,
that?
no. For the design review committee findings, I think you did basically what you just said. It's just reviewing why you think it complies with that standard, and much like for every other standard, it's just identifying why it is you believe they meet that standard.
Okay. But since there's 2 choices, can we just kind of discuss it? And then we vote on the one that seems obvious?
Yes, I believe.
We don't have to have a motion choosing which one, do we, Heather?
Just a motion to approve it, or just a motion to, generally, I think you approve with the design review. You approve it subject to staff making sure, and it's usually Mr. Jeleniski, making sure that they comply with the ordinance with regard to the design review standards.
I thought the motion we made was at the end. We have to make a motion and a vote on each one.
Well, you can do that. I think we talked about this previously. You can do it either way. you can wait until the end, but sometimes it's easy just to go ahead and do that motion with each one, but you can do that either way. If you want to wait till the end, just make it clear what you're approving with each one, and then you can vote and do it at the end.
I think we'll just make the motion at the end. I think that's what we've done traditionally and sort of talk through each one. It seemed to me that it was a really good looking building that has tried to bring a lot of the elements that we've suggested in. So, you know, I feel like we should approve this, that it does meet the comply with Article 9 of the Unified Development Ordinance. Is that the general consensus?
Yeah.
Consensus, moving on. Okay. That the pursuit, number 2, the proposed use or development of the land will not materially endanger the public health or safety. It seems like it's a shop with some offices above. I mean, it's not right next to the fire department, but it's pretty stinking close. So I think based on that, and it does include in the staff report, it cites that fire protection is provided by the Cashiers Glenville Fire Department. So I think we can cite that. Does everyone generally agree that we can move forward on that one? Yeah. Okay. Number 3, that the proposed use or development of the land is reasonably compatible with significant natural and topographic features on the site within the immediate vicinity of the site, given the proposed site design and any mitigation techniques or measures proposed by the applicant. We see in the staff report that there is only 1% slope on the property, that they are not adding any additional covered, uncovered surfaces building on the previous site of a building that has been torn down that they're replacing, and that eventually we're going to say that they're going to have to follow all the county regulations when it comes to stormwater. So I think that'll be sufficient. So is everyone nodding at me? Yes, we're good with that one. 4, that the proposed use or development of the land will not substantially injure the value of adjoining or abutting properties. It seems like this is going to be a really nice looking commercial shop building, which is about the best thing we can have in the center of town. So I think it would only raise the value. And I think that's just fairly logical. Okay. So moving on to number 5, that the proposed use or development of the land will be in harmony with the scale, bulk, coverage, density, and character of the community. It's going to look the same or very similar to the 2 buildings on the same site, and it's going to be smaller than the building we approved for. What was that one that Tim Green did for David Pepper, just right down the road on Burn Street? It's actually no, just right
Village
there.
Walk.
Yeah, Cashiers shops on the walk, walks on the. Anyway, it's right down the street on Burn Street. It's basically the same shape building, but this one's smaller. So I'm very comfortable with the size and scale and bulk of this building. Number 6, that the proposed use is appropriately located with respect to transportation facilities, water supply, fire, police protection, waste disposal, or similar facilities. So they're going to get their sewer from Tuasa. They're right down the road from the fire department, and they're one of a very few buildings that are able to use Jackson County's water system in Cashiers. So I think they're very lucky to be in the location that they are, and that it's very appropriately located. All right, that was number 6. Is everyone good with moving past number 6? Okay. That the proposed use will not cause undue traffic congestion or create a traffic hazard. I think it seems like there are plenty of parking spots clearly labeled, and that we're going to have DOT approved. We have DOT approved ingress and egress on what is that? Burns? No, Frank Allen. And then on Burns, does DOT have to approve that entrance, Mr. Jelinowski? They will. So that'll come with DOT approval. So I believe that is not a traffic hazard if DOT has to rubber stamp it. Okay, number 8, this is where we either approve the application of the special use permit, deny the application of the special use permit or approve it with conditions. Now, we see in Mr. Jelinevsky's report that they recommend approval, that it's met the standard of the ordinance. It seems if we've gone through this checklist, it's been a yes to each one of these. So what was your recommendation that you, where do I find the specific?
That the applicant shall work with the planning department staff for the final approval of architectural plans, site design, stormwater and landscaping plans, and comply with the site construction requirements for the entire project. And I think we make a motion to do just that with potentially, Michael, just adding that specifically when it comes to stormwater, that they communicate with Turner's entity, I forget the name of the.
Cashiers Canoe
Yeah.
Club LLC.
And the Village Green. And
Yeah.
I think, that's where we're at.
Okay, is that the motion you'd like to make, sir?
Yes.
Okay, do I have a second? Debbie has seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous. So I believe now we make a motion to order the planning department to, what do we say?
To prepare the order with everything stated in the motion and in your discussion.
Okay, so do I have that motion to approve, to direct the planning department to prepare the order, including everything in the discussion? Is that right? Close enough? Okay, do I have that motion? Debbie has made that motion. Do I have a second? Robin has seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. I believe with that, we have come to the end of the quasi judicial hearing, so I'd like to close that hearing and move on to new business 4B, the conditional zoning discussion. And I believe that's going to be presented by Mr. Mike Poston.
Good evening, council.
Good evening.
Thank you for spending some time with us this evening, going through some of these concepts and some discussions that we're going to have, especially the next two. The first one, and we mentioned this in passing and sent out some materials a couple weeks ago in preparation for the March meeting, just about some information about what conditional zoning is and what the concept of it is. We kind of talked a little bit about the fact that it is there's three types of approval processes that local governments use in moving and looking at projects and land use. First one is administrative, and the second one, which would be staff decisions that are being made, and the second one would be quasi judicial decisions, special use permits, variances, appeals, and things of that nature. We just did that, right? We just did the special use permit. That comes through a very specific process and follows specific guidelines outlined in state statute, and then some additional ordinance requirements that may come into play. And then there's a legislative approval process, which we don't do too much in Cashiers because we only have two different. What's that? Oh, sorry. Take off my mask and maybe it helps. Okay. Helps people in here. So I'll take off my mask. So we have the legislative process, which we don't employ too much here in the Cashiers district because we only have two districts and they're relatively similar. So there's not a lot of differences between the two as far as uses. And so you don't see many rezonings. But conditional zoning is a rezoning function. And that function is legislative, and how that differs is one of the key procedural differences is quasi judicial comes to this planning council and decisions made at this level. The commissioners have been given that authority to our planning councils to make those decisions. Legislative processes, the councils are used as an advisory board, so you would still see see every application that came in. You'd still review it. You would still make comments on it. And you would still forward instead of making the decision, you'd forward the recommendation. It goes to the planning board and then ultimately to the board of commissioners. But you act as an advisory board. You're giving advice to the board of commissioners after a public hearing process where you receive additional community feedback on those ideas. So that, and conditional zoning is a part of that rezoning process. It's a legislative decision. It's a tool that we find more communities using. It's in the terms of zoning, it's a relatively newer concept, and approved more recently by the state. But we see communities moving more towards this than quasi judicial because it does allow for a little bit more flexibility in how we interact with our communities and how we and what you're able to consider. You realize during the quasi judicial process, if somebody approaches you and says, "Hey, I'd really like to talk to you about that project," you, as sitting in a quasi judicial function, can't answer those questions or have a harder time interacting. In the legislative process, that's a lot different in so much that, like any other legislative process, you can have those conversations. We can have those discussions. You can meet the folks in your community, in the grocery store, in your shop, and have those conversations and understand from their perspective a little bit more. You can email and respond to emails, and all those things are perfectly okay to do in this process. But in Jackson County, the way this would work is you would have a public hearing at the Cashiers level. It would go to the planning board for review, and then the board of commissioners would also hold a public hearing. So, in addition to there'll be two public hearings instead of one quasi judicial hearing, and just more interaction and ability to have that community conversation. What conditional zoning is, it's the ability to take larger complex projects and still have an approval process that takes into consideration that it may not be a simple type of straightforward rezoning, meaning changing a property from residential to commercial. That's a pretty simple process. Conditional zoning allows you to think about more complex projects and how they fit a community and add special conditions to that approval and kind of build in a way a new zoning district specific for that piece of property. Your base zoning district would always, so if your base zoning district is general commercial, you still have to comply with all those rules. But on a more complex project, you and the property owner or developer may come to an understanding that we could have we'd have more buildings and things of that nature if we take care of these issues, and we're going to write that into the code. We might say that retail is an acceptable use, but an auto mechanic shop may not be. So you can limit some of those uses down, so the table of uses can become smaller. And so there's a lot more flexibility in working with property owners and developers and the community and the governmental entity, in this case, the county, in looking at projects more holistically and not just, hey, we're going from residential to commercial. And once you're commercial, you can do anything that you want to do that is allowed in commercial. So what you were provided, what we provided this time was a link to some guidance documentation from the School of Government. For those that don't know what the School of Government is, it's housed on University of North Carolina Chapel Hill's campus. And what the School of Government does is they specialize in helping local governments in all facets of governing, including land use. And what they did is put together a conditional zoning packet that kind of highlights, and this is what the link that was sent to you guys for review, highlights how conditional zoning works, what the potential benefits are, what the differences are. There are also limitations to conditional zoning. For instance, all these conditions have to be agreed to by all the parties. So, you can't have a condition that the property owner or developer says, no, we can't do that. So there are some limitations in the process, but again, it does provide more flexibility in having these conversations. Like any other rezoning process, you still have to consider the small area plan. That is a requirement of any rezoning, is that you have to speak to whether it's consistent or inconsistent with your adopted land use plans. So that brings, we've had a lot of conversations here. You've heard a lot of people speak about small area plan and consistency with the small area plan. In a conditional zoning process, that brings those planning documents to the forefront and saying, hey, are we consistent with these things? Now the one difference I'll point out to anybody that has spent time in other states, North Carolina requires you to address consistency with the plan. It does not require that the decision you make be consistent with the plan. So there's a little bit of nuance to that. So if you're used to that process in a different state, it could be different. State of North Carolina says you have to consider the plan. You have to speak to whether or not it is consistent, but it doesn't require the decision to be consistent. And if it's not, if you deem that not to be consistent, then you have to explain why it's reasonable and in the public interest. Sometimes that happens more so if your plan is a little bit older and conditions have changed around you and you're saying, well, it's reasonable because these things have changed, and you can enumerate those. So the other thing that I provided along with conditional zoning with that document for you to review is a more local version of how it's been implemented. Conditional zoning's been implemented in the Village of Forest Hills, has implemented a few years ago conditional zoning standards. And when I tell you that the conditional zoning process allows you to be more open with the community, you still have to write that in. It's not inherent. It doesn't say once you have conditional zoning, you automatically have to do these lists of things. So you have to build that into your program if that's what you're looking to do. I think the Village of Forest Hills is a good local example of how they've built in community interaction and involvement in the conditional rezoning process, and they've done that early on. So if you were to flip to, I guess it'd be page 4, you'll see some of the public input meeting requirements. So there's a pre-application conference. We do that already, where people have to come in and kind of talk to us about what's going on with the request, what the request is, and what ordinances and standards would have to apply, what processes we'd apply. They have a pre-application submittal where they're going to submit some documentation for our review, and then we'll have a pre-submittal conference under the Forest Hills model. But the public input meeting, D, is one that I think that if we want to move forward with this conversation, this would be an important piece to add, to make sure we have in there, which is before they come with a final application to the planning department, they would have already had a community meeting. They've given notice. They've held that meeting. They have some procedures worked out about how and why people get notified. And then they also have a report that they have to turn in with the final plan, highlighting, when the who, what, when, and where of the meeting, who was in attendance, kind of more of a minute, giving some minutes and some idea of what was talked about, what was discussed. Also highlighting if there was any changes made to the plan based on that community input for review. And then we go through the normal formal submittal requirement process, and we evaluate what types of information we're looking for. You can see in E, formal submittal requirements. They require conceptual site plan drawn to scale. And then they kind of tell you they give you a list from A to O, if you will, about the site plan, about information they'd like to see on that site plan or see accompany that site plan. So it's an opportunity to talk a little bit more about, what types of things, information would be good to have in talking about a more complex project. And then it goes on and gives you a couple other, talks about setting the public planning board agenda here to be the planning council. So then the next part of this ordinance section goes on to talk about how it gets through the approval process and the hearing process. And that certainly wouldn't apply to us. But this is what I would tell you to take a look at. This is something that I believe is a good example of how we can implement conditional zoning in our districts. I think I've noted it to you before, but we have, of course, 3 zone districts that we deal with, 3 regulated districts. This idea was brought up to us by the Cullowhee Planning Council about a year ago, or maybe a little bit more, as we started to discuss through this. And I think what staff would like to do is start to prepare a conditional zoning process in the model of what you see in the Forest Hills ordinance. It won't be word for word. It won't be everything exactly, because we'd have to make it fit our needs and requirements in the UDO. But certainly wanted to bring this to you before we started work on that, to gain any feedback that the council may have, any thoughts, questions, concerns about the overall process, how it works, things that are in this ordinance. I would say that also bring back your attention back to the school government document. They also have several examples of conditional zoning and how it's done in every place. And it's all just a little bit different to fit the needs of their community. So I think I'll stop there and just ask the council if there's any questions, thoughts, concerns about the process, or if they'd like me to delve a little bit deeper into some of the finer points of conditional zoning. So, yeah, I mean, they are for a variety of reasons. I think where a lot of them move towards that is quasi judicial procedure is more rigid. Quasi judicial procedures have been around since zoning was instituted. This won't. What we would look to do is use this as replace the special use permit process really with a conditional zoning process. We'd still have to have quasi judicial hearings potentially, because you might get a variance request, you might get an appeal of a staff determination request. So you'll always have quasi judicial responsibilities in that regard. But what you've heard mostly, at least in the last 5 years I've been here, is quasi judicial hearings surrounding special use permits. And so that would, if you set that to be the if conditional zoning, if you're going to trigger the conditional zoning using triggers, the same triggers or similar triggers that you use to create a conditional use or special use permit, that's the process that we take a look at. The only other thing that I will note that's out there, there's some bills in the State House moving through, talking a little bit about conditional zoning. And we'll have to keep those in mind and keep an eye on that to see where that's heading as we start to put this together. That may change how we have to approach some of the points of the conditional zoning standards. But I think by and large, the Village of Forest Hills has a model that I think is a good one locally that we can use to model ours after.
Correct me if I'm wrong, our decisions, when we make them, even in the quasi judicial for a special use permit, go then to the Jackson County Planning Board for, no?
No, in the quasi judicial setting, this is the board of the decision-making board.
So there's not even an appeal at the county commission.
So not at the county commissioners, like all quasi judicial procedures, the right to appeal is heard in Superior Court.
Okay, so it's our text amendments.
Yes.
That go through the planning board.
Correct.
And then to the county commission.
Correct. And this would be the same thing. This would be the rezoning process is a map amendment, which follows the same procedures as a text amendment would. So it would follow that
We would
lineage.
make a recommendation.
Yes.
If it would go down to the commissioners, they ultimately really have four, as I read in here, that there's 4 things they can do. Say yes with conditions, say no, or send it back up here to work it out or
Yeah, it certainly can. You would hope that in most cases you would see conditional zoning approved with all the conditions, right? Because, and I might have glossed over this and I apologize and come back to it, but one of the things about conditional zoning is, it's flexible enough that if there are concerns that are identified in the process, somebody comes up and says, I'm really worried about X, and there may be a solution that can be amenable to everybody, that can be built in. So you wouldn't have to go back all the way to square one. And you can you have a little bit more flexibility inside the process to make those amendments, make those conditions, agree to additional conditions as you're here in front of the planning council or you're in front of the board of commissioners and they say, well, I'm really worried about. Yeah.
Just to clarify, it would be heard at the county planning board level and then at the commissioners with public hearings both places.
No, so the way that we did this, and we changed this with the Unified Development Ordinance. It used to be that anything that came from the planning council that was a text amendment or a map amendment had to have a public hearing at each stage. What we found for both council initiated amendments and rezoning applications is once you got to the public hearing process, because you have to have their statutory requirements for advertising on public hearings that you have to meet, it could take 90 to 120 days from the date that you schedule the public hearing to the date the commissioners would make a decision and schedule their public hearing. So what we did is we tried to streamline that just a little bit. So you still have in a zone district, you still have a public hearing at the council level where everyone can come speak and talk about it. At the planning board level, it's just a review. And so all they're going to do is do a review. And then there's the only statutorily mandated public hearing requirement is at the board of commissioners level. And so that you would always have to have that. As communities, we've decided, and as a community here in Cashiers, we decided we also want to have that public hearing at the local level. So we'll have 2 public hearings, and then the planning board still has a statutory requirement to make a recommendation. In the past, mostly those recommendations have followed what the local jurisdiction or the planning council level they've matched those. I've not seen one in 5 years that has differed between the planning board and the council recommendation.
So we do get, as opposed to us being the final authority, it makes the county commissioners the final authority short of Superior Court.
Yes, I mean, so once the decision's made at the county level, then yeah, if there's going to be an appeal after that, it'll work its way through the court system.
Well, I mean, I'm interested in continuing to explore this, but the way that I look at it is we still need to get right something that we have in air right now.
Sure.
With our quasi judicial process, which is the 1,500 square foot trigger. And so one of the problems and one of the reasons why I think we're fatigued with the quasi judicial process and will then become fatigued with this conditional zoning process is if we have to look at every building bigger than a doghouse in Cashiers. And I think, and interestingly enough, if you look back at the history, as I've been studying this issue on what we're going to look at next, the building size, you'll see that when we first had the ordinance written, that where they brought that 5,000 foot erroneously from was 5,000 square feet was supposed to be the trigger for the quasi judicial process. And now that was 20 years ago. That was thought to be that place where you move into a medium-sized building, and everything else, like this building that we approved today, could have just been approved at the staff level. So wouldn't it be correct with this, if we move to this conditional zoning, to look at where the appropriate square footage to trigger this, below which a staff review would be sufficient, and above which we would go into this more involved process?
I think that's always something that the council can consider, where those triggering mechanisms are. Certainly, it's something that, like you alluded to, something that has been discussed several times and changed on occasion over the last 18 years that the Cashiers ordinance has been in effect. But that would be something that the council would have to discuss, and certainly can be discussed further.
Because once again, in today's quasi judicial hearing for this approximately 3,500 square foot building, we got a report, as we very typically do from John, that says everything about the building is approved. They've worked with John. Y'all have done a great job to get an approval. And then by the time it comes to us, all we have to say is we listen to John read everything and say it's green light, green light, green light. And then we have to go through this long, complicated process to say, okay.
Yeah.
And this is my concern for this council. And some of these projects that have come up have highlighted this, is that we spend so much time looking at every little building that's built in Cashiers that is 100% approved by our rules. We use all of our meeting time on these trials for these buildings that are approved before they get to us. And we don't have any time to work on the ordinance itself to make sure we have the right law out there to judge new buildings by. So, I mean, I'm interested in going forward and examining this process, but I want it to make sense and us to use it in a way that makes sense, not have a legislative hearing for, the third building on a site that's going to look like the other two buildings that we've approved. The last 5 buildings have been bigger than, and everything else. Like, I would have rather spent this time working on I don't know what about the ordinance. But we all are business owners. We all have busy lives. This is going to be a good long meeting.
Yeah.
And time is not infinite.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's my thoughts on this. I think it's certainly worth looking forward. I'd like to maybe even take the opportunity to visit one of Forest Hill's meetings, see how it works, if there's one coming up. But I mean, it seems like a smart addition to the process. And even though it doesn't mean as much power would sit with this council, it seems like through the whole process, more power would sit in Jackson County. because we're making a recommendation. We're able to talk with people along the way. Sometimes I've been frustrated in some of these quasi judicial hearings because I felt like I hear through the grapevine that some applicant is making some rookie mistake that I could have just gone to him and said, hey, you know, you're kind of going about this the wrong way. If you do it this way, it's going to be very easy for us to approve. And I'm not able to do that because of how the situation is written. So that amount of greater leniency seems efficient to me. Am I seeing this correctly? Is that possible?
Yeah, so what it does, I mean, and this gets back to that, you know, you're able to have more interaction with the community. That's what this process really part of what this process offers is more interaction, right? And one of the concerns that we hear from some of these quasi judicial processes is there's frustration about, you know, who has standing, who doesn't have standing. Can I get up here and tell you why I feel like this is a good project, a bad project, or what my concerns are going forward? This is a type of process that would allow for that type of interaction to occur, not just here in a meeting setting, but also in between those meeting settings where folks just maybe have a few concerns, and that all can be brought to bear in the process. And, you know, again, with this building in a public or community input segment in the beginning can also have the ability to help answer some of those questions and provide interaction between an applicant and the community to better understand what the project is. And the applicant also gets the benefit of understanding what the concerns of the community are. And maybe by the time it gets to this level, some of those concerns have been addressed through that process. That's some of the hope and the goal, and provide more understanding community-wide about what's going on and with this project, or what the, you know, may reduce hopefully some of those rumors or things of that nature that may be more easily addressed.
Well, it seems, I'm thinking about this in a new light with all the stuff that's gone on, and it seems that there are some benefits to this. It seems like there's been some fixes. It's the latest and greatest. And it seems like it would be useful to us working with planning to look over a little bit more specifically some of the Forest Hill stuff with some draft changes of how it would specifically look with some of the Cashiers language applied to it. So if the council is in agreement with that, we'll just direct planning to continue to work on this and bring it back to us for further review in the next meeting. Is that good with everyone?
I think it's worth further to look into it.
Yeah.
I do.
Okay.
I think it can save us all a bunch of time and really
Well,
open up our.
and let me just be clear here, and I don't want to make too fine a point of this. This will not eliminate potential controversial issues and projects, right? So that this isn't a magic wand that says, hey, after this process is instilled, everybody's going to agree that everything is okay. It just provides more of a community outlet to have these conversations. So that doesn't mean that everything will be a 20-minute meeting from here on out. So I don't want to have you guys mischaracterizing how this process would work.
It can help us as the council to squash some of the rumors that go around. regarding projects
Correct.
that
Correct.
that come to us with, and we can't say anything.
Yeah.
And plus the local people, they'll feel more involved because they
Right.
can participate if
Correct.
they feel like they have a reason. And
As a planning thing, it's not that
Right.
this is what we're bringing. So,
Right.
Yeah. That's good. Are we supposed to be using mics?
If you can, yeah, because I'm not sure it's picking up. So.
All right, well, with that being said, though, I do believe that, I mean, that's probably as much as we can discuss at this point on this issue. And if you'd bring us back
Yeah.
some more specific language.
And the only other thing I'd ask of the council, if you see something, and if you'll review those documents, if you see anything that you have questions or thoughts that you really want to make sure gets to the staff as we're developing this, please let us know. This process, we'll try to make this process fairly uniform across all three regulated districts, because those would be the three that would use the process. What may vary is some standards or regulations that are more unique to each individual community that they've already established. So that's how we'll look to proceed forward.
That sounds excellent. So you'll have some update for us in the next meeting?
I would hope so. We'll continue to work on that.
Okay. All right. With that, let's close this agenda item, which is 4B, and move on to 4C, the building size discussion. And I believe there is a presentation from planning for us.
Yeah. So at the conclusion of our last meeting, what I gathered from the council is they wanted more information about the small area plan, specifics of what each of these areas kind of call for, some more discussion about building size and Cashier, what exists today, and generally bring back more information to help us consider and help the council and the community consider maximum floor area ratio recommendations, should there be maximum building limit recommendations, and to bring back more information that allows this council to consider this issue, and maybe even some thoughts of recommendations. And so I put this together with that in mind, to give you kind of an idea of, again, small area plan, what building types exist in Cashiers today, and how our regulatory framework fits into some of these things. So first of all, it's small area plan really talks in the character areas about and really mentions building footprints or building size in a couple of about 3 of our character areas that they take a look at. The first one is the village core. So in that village core character area, where they talk about small to medium building scale footprints with active street fronts. The land use recommendation number 2 in the village core area talks about encouraging short blocks, small building footprints, and pedestrian pathways. And then you get to the recommendation, which is where we get to some of the building size and floor area ratio numbers that are that have been discussed extensively. And here's what the UDO recommended update was: consider a maximum floor area ratio of 1.5, or revising the maximum square footage threshold for commercial mixed-use buildings. A floor area maximum of 1.5 or maximum square feet of 8,500 square feet could be implemented in tandem with other design controls to reinforce the village core. So that's the recommendation, is to consider these standards as a possibility and as a way to reinforce the village core. And of course, in the ordinance that they talk about several other concepts and items that could also be looked at and discussed in how we develop moving forward. And if you'll look at this, I don't know that I don't think I have a pointer on this one, or maybe I do. Yeah, here we go. Well, I'm sorry, go back to the, okay, you're there. So this is, and just to remind everybody, this red area is what the small area plan calls the village core. So that's the village core area. The next character area that discusses building footprints or building size and is the gateway district. Yeah. Whoop. So the gateway districts, and these are well, let me see if I can get it up here. These are these areas right here. So this is the red area right here. These red circles are really the gateway areas. So that's the 4 areas that this character area is really talking about. And I didn't write the entirety of the character area description. I wrote I just got to the issues that or the point of buildings and where we talk about building size. In this area, this is what we say. We say larger buildings are more appropriate here than in the village core. So the idea being that maybe your larger building types, according to the plan, would be in these areas and not so much in that area potentially. The land use 6 talks about the northern and southern gateways, and it says ensure compatibility with the scale and character of existing developments and natural surroundings. So really, that recommendation talks a little bit about these 2 gateways, which tend to be a little bit smaller gateways, given what currently exists. Third character area that talks about building size really is the transitional area. And the transitional area is designed to occur between the village core and the gateway and the residential areas. So this brownish color is your transitional areas. This lighter green area is going to be what the plan calls residential areas. And then you've got the village core and the gateway districts, just to remind everybody where we are on these maps. And then LU7 says building footprint size, massing, and height should be compatible with adjacent development. So, you know, what I should stop here and just mention, you know, with planning documents, you know, we call them guiding documents, they're policies. We developed some policy recommendations. In some cases, those recommendations are, we need further study to discuss what's appropriate and how do we address these issues, you know, any specific issue more comprehensively. You have a, you know, in this land use plan, you have a recommendation that says, considering this maximum floor area ratio or considering a maximum building size limit. But it, you know, and it gives you some parameters of what could be discussed, but there still has to be this discussion. And this is kind of what we're doing starting here today and talking about these concepts and how to move forward with these concepts. So moving off the small area plan, so those are the areas that really talk about the building footprint and the actual specific recommendations about, you know, dealing with building footprints. I will mention to you that, again, this conversation really does discuss building footprints, but the small area plan does discuss some other parts of develop, you know, that could come into play with development. Those other development design controls that could be used, as was discussed in the recommendation of the village core. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more about building footprint. So the existing building footprint. So today, where the small area plan has about 5 or 6 different character areas, today we have 2 zoning districts. We have the village center district, village commercial district, and the general commercial district. So those are the 2 districts that we have overall. In the village center district, we looked at based on best information we have, which in some cases is just your tax card, to determine what type of footprint that you had on any specific building. And footprint and square footage, you know, gross square footage can be different, right? Because gross square footage could be footprint is what the building footprint is. You know, gross square footage is if you go up 2 levels or 3 levels, you may have more square footage in the building than what the footprint is. So, but looking at footprint, because that's actually, you know, in some of these descriptions we're talking about footprint, but the existing structures, most of the existing structures have a footprint less than 8,500 square feet. Just to bring you back to this discussion we've talked about and what the small area plan talks about. Floor area ratio. I'll explain floor area ratio a little bit more just here in a second. But the floor area ratio of 1.5 means 1.5 feet of building space per foot of lot space. None of the structures that are currently in the village center district would exceed that far. They would all comply with a floor area ratio of 1.5. We'll just note that there were 6 properties that had buildings that had a footprint greater of 8,500 square feet. The largest of that is the Laurel Terrace property, and it's an estimated square footage because they're all broken down into condo units. So we had to use some math, but it's approximately 12,400 square feet. Okay. Yeah. And again, based on how the tax card puts it out, so we'll have to do some looking into that. But based on what we found in the tax card, and it could be that if it's an open air structure, not considered a heated square space, we'll take a look at that. David, thank you for mentioning that. But it does have 24,000 square feet of, because it's a 2-story process. So there's certainly, several properties that have that 8,500 that are larger than that. In the general commercial district, we'll see, again, most structures are still less than 8,500 square feet. All the properties with existing non-residential and we didn't count residential structures. We didn't address residential structures. In the general commercial district, there are a lot of residential structures because that district spreads beyond the road frontages. So you have more residential than the village center does. There's at least 13 properties that have greater than 8,500 square feet. It's worth noting that the largest footprints in the Cashiers commercial area are within the general commercial district. largest building being approximately 65,000 square feet. That's the Ingalls. And then you've got the other part of that Ingalls Shopping Center's got 25,000 square feet. Then, of course, the County Rec Center is actually also in the general commercial district with 22,750 square feet. So some of the larger building sizes that you have within the district. So back to this idea of what a floor area ratio is and defined. Floor area ratio is a measure of development density. Higher floor area ratios equate to more dense developments of a parcel. So just to give you a visual look at what that is, it gives you a couple different. This is a floor area ratio of 1/2. So basically, if you had a single story building, it would take up 1/2 of the property. A floor area of 1 that allows you to basically have a square foot for square foot maximum. So now, if you had a 10,000 square foot lot, you could have a 10,000 square foot building. And then a floor area ratio of 1.5 allows you to add that up. And then you see down here, just the different types of configurations of what that could mean. Just another way to take a look at this, again, a 1-to-1 ratio, and we're recommending, and the small area plan talks about a 1.5 square foot to 1 ratio. Again, that's just a cleaner look at how that could look for 3 different configurations of the same floor area ratio. So just some examples of some communities that have a floor area ratio. Highlands has a floor area ratio of 1.4. And then they have for a 3rd story apartment or office space, you can get 0.35 square feet additional if you meet certain conditions. So again, just an example of that calculation, 10,000 square foot lot, 1.4 floor area ratio, it's 10,000 times 1.4, 14,000 square feet of gross. Most people do gross floor area. That would include your stairwells and your, any unheated space that would still count as gross floor area. Blowing Rock has a floor area ratio of 0.4. Again, that same calculation, 10,000 square feet, floor area ratio of 0.4 gives you 4,000 square feet of building size. These certainly are not the only communities that use floor area ratios, but these are some of the ones that we typically talk about in some respect when we talk about comparing Cashiers to what areas are like Cashiers in some respects. Those just happen to be 2 cities and towns that use that calculation method. The other part of that conversation is maximum square footage limitations. And, so some of these are going to be, we want to try to get jurisdictions that were close in proximity, and then some that have a little bit closely resemble more seasonal type of areas and resort communities. The town of Silva, just because of its proximity, and we work with their ordinance quite a bit, their office professional district, so they have a maximum square footage for buildings in one of their zoning districts, not all of them, just one of them. And that's the office professional district. And they have a maximum of 16,000 square feet for any building, single building. City of Asheville does have some maximum building size. They are specific to the zoning district that you're in. I try to highlight a few of these here. Office 1 and 2 is a 4,000 square foot max with an 8,000 second. If you have 2 stories, it'd be 8,000. The office business district has a 30,000 square foot. Then they have some commercial business districts of 6,000 square feet for single, 2 stories, 12,000 square feet. The 45,000 square feet for their commercial business too, and the 200,000 square feet. Again, Asheville set these up because, of the types of uses that they allow in some of these districts, what the purpose of those districts are. So they spent some time developing these limitations based on the needs of their ordinance and how they were looking to achieve some of the goals, I'm sure, of their land use plan. The town of Duck, it's a smaller town down by the coast, and that's why, I thought it was an interesting comparison, not because Cashiers isn't a municipality and we're not down by the beach, but they are the type of area that sees a large seasonal population. So they do see some of the same types of residual effects that we do. And they do have some districts that have 5,000 square foot by right. And then they can go up to 10 to 15,000 square feet, depending on their district with a special use permit. So they have some limitations. They've chosen to take a look at that in a different way, depending on that district. And I think it's also worthy just to note that there are some communities that don't implement either maximum building sizes or floor area ratios that we normally would seek out. So Maggie Valley, Banner Elk, Brevard, Biltmore Forest, those areas which are closer to us, and most of them in the mountains, are don't implement those tools. Now, John will tell you, and has probably told you several times, I know I've heard him say, parking requirements are also around. You also have some other requirements that come into play when people look at developing a lot. So while these folks may not have a specific maximum building size or floor area ratio, sometimes those other standards kind of still have to be considered in site development and site prep. The one community that I put on here that we haven't talked a lot about in the past is Currituck County. And the reason why I have Currituck and why I talked with Currituck is that they do have some similarities to Jackson County in how we work with our communities that are outside our municipal areas. Currituck is one of the only counties that I'm aware of in North Carolina that has 0 municipal boundaries within it. There's not a chartered city or town in Currituck County, which certainly interests me as we work with the communities of Cullowhee and the communities of Cashiers that aren't municipalities themselves. And they do have countywide zoning, but in how they work with development, because they are another county that sees seasonal residents and their seasonal numbers go up, and it is a destination in the summertime and for different reasons than Jackson County, but still we have some similarities. It's just worth noting. I'll talk about that a little bit more here in another slide. Overall, when we talk about considering introducing maximum building limits or floor area ratios, I think one of the first things we want to talk about is the small area plan discusses building footprint and building size. So we'll have to clarify if we're going to address building footprint with a maximum limit, or we're going to address building size. Because again, the footprint is just the impact to the property, and you can build up potentially. Building size is usually your gross floor area, so that would count every level with the maximum. Why I bring that up is because our character areas talk mostly about footprints, but in some other areas we talk about building size. So we really want to clarify what we're trying to achieve and make sure that we're building the maximum size limits based on what, if we move forward with that, we want to build those in a way that achieves those goals. I think another thing to consider is, and I mentioned this earlier, the small area plan breaks down the community into several character districts with different objectives regarding building footprints. We talked about the 3 different ones earlier. And I also mentioned to you that currently there are only 2 zoning districts. So matching the small area plan concepts into our two district zoning model will be difficult because, you'd have to either create new districts or break down those districts, especially the general commercial, where it includes the gateway areas, the portion of the village core, and a portion of the transitional zones. So the commercial district, but those 3 character areas, have different goals. So if we were to leave the exact zoning in place, it'd be very difficult to accommodate all 3 of those. We'd have to, I don't know if impossible is a word, but very difficult to differentiate the different areas of the general commercial district and break it down. It's just something to consider that we need to think about as we're moving through with this conversation. The village commercial likewise includes both portions of the village core and the transitional area. Again, not that they're overall incompatible, but we're dealing with 2 zoning districts and we're going to try to figure that out. So we have to take a look at those concepts and how we're going to do that. Types of uses. And this is just for everyone in the community, for the council to recognize that, if we're using these types of different things, different mechanisms to limit maximum building limits, then we have to recognize that not all uses may be accommodated in the maximum building size. I can't tell you, and I can't predict which uses can and won't be done. But I think it's safe to say that not every use will come to town, and we just have to recognize that and understand that in that decision-making process. The expansion of existing buildings, again, a recognition that some buildings that are close to whatever limits you set, you know, when you expand buildings, you got to expand them in conformity with the ordinance as it's written. So just understanding that if there's a building, if the size that we have, just recognition that maybe some of those buildings would have a tough time being expanded if that was something that was being proposed. Well, not tough time, they just wouldn't be able to do it. And then you've got non-conforming uses, and in general, non-conforming uses typically aren't allowed to expand. So when you have a non-conforming use, they exist as they are moving forward. I will say that I've worked in some jurisdictions that do allow those non-conforming buildings to expand under certain conditions. Again, that's something we should take a look at. I think, you know, I think of some of these bigger buildings, I think things like the rec center, you know, I can't tell you right now if they have any, you know, if it's been decided that they're going to have an expansion of that building, but at 22,000 square feet, certainly that would limit their ability to expand. Again, I'm not telling you they are going to expand. It's just, again, those are the thought process of things that we should think about in this conversation, you know, about these things. I think I've mentioned this to you before. When you set a limit, it's easy to administer, you know, it's easy. So that's always there. There's you know, whether that number is 8,500 or number that you believe is better suited for the village, or if that's not the number. Floor area ratios are mathematical calculations. They can be calculated. So I think that what the small area plan really asks this community to do is consider this. You know, there are several parts of our small area plan that talk about footprint sizes and character and design, and we need to figure out if this is an appropriate tool. Consider these tools that are being proposed, and are they right to achieve the goals that we want to achieve? But we have, and these are some of the things I think we should take a look at. You know, that would certainly come into play. Just to highlight what I was mentioning earlier about our character areas and our zoned areas. So this is our character area. So you got the village core, you've got the parks and open space, you've got the lakefront, you've got residential, transitional, and you've got these gateways. That's the plan. So there's several districts. This is your existing zoning map. So you've got village center commercial, and you've got the general commercial. So we've got to figure out and look at a mechanism that works for that. That brings me to one of the recommendations that hasn't been talked about too much, but I think is one that's worthy of looking forward to. Land use recommendation 9, consider codifying form-based criteria to improve predictability of development and review processes. I think it'd be worth the time for us to really talk about recodifying the Cashiers development standards to a form-based code that's based on the small area plan. And when I told you I was going to come back to Curry Tuck for a reason, and this is why, because in talking with their planning director, the one thing that they thought they did really well with their ordinance structure is they matched it to their comprehensive plan. The language, the goals were all tied together into a codified ordinance structure and regulatory structure. I believe this would be very prudent and beneficial for the Cashiers community to really take a look, and the council to really take a look at building size. You know, you've heard some concerns about all the other parts of development. I think it'd be good to look at this more holistically and really spend some time and energy to recodify that ordinance to meet the challenges. Our current ordinance was adopted in 2003. That's 18 years ago. I think, you know, from all I can tell, Cashiers was a much different place 18 years ago. I think we're entering into some you know, different times right now, and I think this would be probably a very prudent step to take in moving forward, because I think once you start talking about building size, that's going to lead you into conversations about these other parts of the small area plan, other parts of the ordinance that talk about, you know, things like residential development and how we handle that, and moving into those things. So I think this is when we talk about recommendations, I think this is one that would encompass a lot of these things. A lot of these are issues and thought processes that we're discussing. That's what I had for you planned, but I'll certainly take any questions that the board may have, council may have.
First, Michael, I'd really like to commend you and the planning department. That was a very informative discussion. And while I don't think it takes us all the way to where we need to be, that was really helpful, especially comparing it to other relevant communities, I think is a really useful way to think of it. I have a couple thoughts right off the back that as we continue to look into this, because I don't think we're going to do anything on it exactly tonight, although I am interested in seeing possibly what we could do with that text there that we left in the last meeting. But one of the things I wonder about is the floor area ratio. And I see that one of the things that you recommended as a possibility is a floor area ratio of 1.5. I think it's interesting that Highlands does 1.4. So maybe in looking at Highlands, we could look closer and see how many identifiable projects, especially 1.4 with that third story, and to see some specific projects that met that. Because, I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I go eat Chinese food in Highlands. I'm in Highlands all the time. I can connect the conversation when you point me to a building in Highlands and say, this building is this. It met that floor area ratio. But another thing I want to think about as we look at this with our specific circumstances, and this is why I get a little just nervous of where we're going when we talk about lot coverage, because we've worked so hard to look at buildings being denser, to work to recreate this more historic town that never got built in Cashiers, that was more walkable. We're stretched all along 107 and 64, and there's not connecting roads, and there's no way that you're ever walking from Ingalls to Cornucopia unless you're a professional walker. But I also think about the fact that we don't have any stormwater management system, and that we do have to manage stormwater on site, and we're in the Chattooga River Basin, which makes us have the highest level of North Carolina on-site water capture. So one of the things I want to look at is looking at some sites with having to capture and treat stormwater on site. What of these floor area ratios are even reasonable to assume we'll be able to achieve? Because I think one of the reasons we didn't really worry about this in the past is as we actually tried to work toward a denser center, we constantly ran into the issue of on-site water treatment taking up a big part of the site, making it less dense, just as a practical level, just following North Carolina law. So if we could also see some images I mean, I'm a very visual person. So if you can show me images or talk about sites of how that relates, it would be helpful. And I'm also very concerned about one point you bring up, because I don't want to be the council that says that the Baptist church can't add a new, I don't know, they want to have a elder outreach and they want to have that at their building. And I'm sorry, your building footprint is over 8,000 square feet. It's a maximum. There's not an appeal process. Sorry, Baptist. That is not my recipe for having a happy life in Cashiers.
I think this is why why the last slide exists. I think that it's 22,000 square feet plus or minus. Yeah, and again, I'm not sharing that information with you to say, hey, building limits are appropriate or not appropriate. I just share that to make sure that you guys understand, what should be considered in the decision-making process. I really think that's why it leads me to the form-based code discussion and the land use 9 recommendation, where we talk about, over the years, we developed the ordinance, and then we kind of, have, I won't say patchwork, but we've kind of fixed it as we moved along. And I think that with all the development pressures that we're looking coming down at us and things of that nature, I think that, we can have, we can look towards recodifying the entire ordinance and looking at storm,
Well, what would that process look like, though?
well,
I mean,
it's
easy
going to
to
be,
say, but
yeah, no, it's easy to say. I mean, we'd have to bring in folks to it would be a full-blown ordinance, right? And we would most likely request in our budget to bring consultants in to have that conversation, and to have that conversation, in a community context, not just, hey, let's stick them in a room and have them type all these things out and bring us all these great ideas, but come in, get to know the community, understand where we are as a community and what our concerns and needs are. And there are groups out there that are going to be, that will have experience enough to maybe bring some new ideas into our community based on the small area plan concepts and how we manage some of these things. You guys have heard me say this before. I think, in working with ordinances and working in building communities, you got to find the balance between the natural and built environment. And it's different for every community, because every community has different, environmental concerns or environmental thought processes and development thought processes. How those two merge is where we get all these discussion points. And I think it's certainly worth having that conversation, but having it instead of us saying, okay, well, we've checked the box, or we've looked at this and here's what we think. I think taking a look at it as a total regulatory framework makes a lot of sense for us, because it's not, like I said, it starts off with us talking about building size, but we also talk about a lot of different things. Stormwater is one of the things we talk about. Connectivity. How do we move to and fro? And I know, Michael, you said that folks aren't going to walk from Cashiers to Cornucopia. I think that also recognizes it if they have a choice. And there's some in this community that don't have a choice about getting in a car. I'd much rather get in a car to go from Ingalls to Cornucopia too, but not everyone will have that choice. So how are we doing this even with the eye of equity involved for all of the community users? So I think
just
it's,
for the
but
record, I'd love to be able to walk from Cornucopia.
I was just trying to remind us that, because we had that conversation before, and we've had people bring that to us before and say, well, nobody's going to do that. But maybe folks that don't have a choice.
People do it,
Yeah.
and it is dangerous.
Yeah. So I think again, we have some of these things, some of these concepts in our ordinance today, but our ordinance was built for Cashiers 2003, and we've tried to amend it along the way as we start moving forward. I think this is going to be something, and is it going to take some time? Yes, it'll take some time to develop. But again, it's going to take time to do a lot of these different changes, and staff, recognizing that every one of our communities are important, but we have 3 zone districts plus outside the county. So we've got to allocate our staff resources. We probably will bring in some folks to help us with these types of projects, but I think this is one that deserves, that I would put to the council to say, yes, let's have this conversation and continue to have this conversation. And we'll have to continue to amend our existing ordinance, mainly part of the reason because the state's going to tell us we have to while we're working on this. But this, I think, is a path forward that makes a lot of sense.
So my next question for you is, well, first, let me preface it with this. This concept of form-based code is something I really tend to support. It focuses on what the buildings look like instead of what the use inside the building is, but because we don't care if a dress shop turns to a dog spa. As long as it's a good-looking building. We don't have dress shops turning into chemical factories here. It's not a big, as we looked various times through trying to organize Cashiers around a prohibited use list, it seemed ridiculous. Our real estate is just too high in value. There's not going to be a junkyard come when it's, several $100,000 an acre. It's just not realistic. So I would say, we've been thinking about this form-based code movement for a long time, And it always seemed like this idea that was just over the hill. And if now is it's time for celebration. But the reality of it is, who are these people that we're going to get, and who's going to pay for them? Because people have come to me, members of the community have come to me and talked about this possibility, and they've talked about, even raising the money to hire some of the most famous names that could be hired to do this sort of thing. But I spoke to you about this, and you said that it has to go through a budgetary process with the county. It has to be put out for an RFP. So I'm interested in this, but I'm more interested if we're able to raise the money and get the best people in the world than if we put it out there and just go with the lowest bidder.
Yeah, well, so here, and Heather may jump in here, talk about the legal aspects of what the county's obligation is when we have a county contractor. We put out an RFP. I think you always want to put out, to get the results you want to make sure your RFP is stating what you really want to have. And then you're having people respond to how they can, I know you all know this, but just to restate the obvious, you put out the RFP, the request for proposals, to say, this is what we're looking for. And I think in this case, we would look at not only recodifying the ordinance, but also looking at our zoning districts, and could we more appropriately identify areas that fit better into those character areas that we identified in the small area plan, that most everybody I heard speak said that they believe that the small area plan is a good document. And I think that's great to hear, because that's what we would use, to be the guidance for building this development ordinance. So you build that RFP, then and there are some governmental rules about it. The county will be the ones bringing in, issuing the contract, budgeting for it and issuing the contract. And we do have to follow rules and regulations. And Heather, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how we have to contract a little bit in the county.
I will say that as far as the RFP process, does not have to be the lowest bidder. This is not this is a service contract. This is not a construction or a supplies contract. So it can be the best proposal based on your RFP. So what Mike's saying is correct. It's all in how you write the RFP, and that's important because that sets out who you get. There are some good companies that the county would be able to have in the budgeting process. We know it's an expensive process, but that's something that we can handle in the budget process. There are good companies out there that we would ask to submit proposals on this, and probably have some input from this council. We've done that in different ways on that committee on how to choose the correct person in response to that RFP. It is important that the county takes that initiative as the one who does that, because if you have someone raising money or giving money for it, there's always the question about how their interests were treated differently. And it's important that it come from the county, who's looking at everyone's perspectives in the committee, much like the same process that you went through, hopefully not as involved, but the same type of process with your small area plan.
Yeah. And then that's what we did with small area plan. We put it out in an RFP. We got that response back. We picked Stewart at the time, and produced what I think most everyone that I heard speak today agrees is a good document for us to use moving forward. And I think we can try to kind of continue to do patchwork, but I think that at the end of the day, it's going to be hard to by the time you get done patching it all to match the small area plan, you've just created a new ordinance, but we've done it in the span of 5 to 10 years. I mean, because we're talking about and that may be an exaggeration, but each time we do that, we're going to have to devote staff resource time, and it's just going to be a little longer. I think we have the best way to affect that, and the best way to include the community in this conversation, all parts of the community that wish to be involved, is to bring in a group that's able to have those conversations, that we can bring them here physically, and talk about that. And they'll get the small area plan, but they can also ask deeper questions of those different folks, and we can find out where this community's balance is, and try to incorporate all those concepts into a document that can still be easy to apply, easy to understand, and allows for procedures and processes that takes into account the unique nature of Cashiers. And it's not just the physical features of Cashiers that's unique. Cashiers is folks in big cities will laugh. This is a more urban part of our county, but it's not a municipality. And so, you're a kind of an urban part of a rural county, and we've got to figure out how that all works. There's not many differences between cities and towns in zoning, or counties and towns in zoning, but there are differences. So we have to be able to account for those differences, because we still have to follow all state regulations as they apply to counties and not cities. So we still have to incorporate all those things into our ordinance framework.
So how should we help you? Because I think in past conversations that I've had with these council members, and as I look around, feel free to jump in, this is something that we've all been looking forward to. So I think it would be very easy to have a unanimous motion to say, begin this process of looking into creating this RFP to move us toward conditional zoning, or at least look into what the cost would be.
Right. I think that's a great thing to do if that's something that the council wants to do. It just lets us bring back to the county, hey, why are we doing this? Because that's in our small area plan. Our council believes that there's value in us pursuing this, and because of the development pressures that we see, not just today, but what will continue to happen in Cashiers, let's build the tools to help us address those. It takes a little bit longer. I think in terms of planning, it's still kind of a short range project. It's going to, we would hope that this would be, it'll be probably a year-long process again. But what you're going to get out of it is something that, form-based code that fits Cashiers. There'll be elements that probably are shared amongst a lot of different jurisdictions, but it would be built to fit Cashiers.
Well, that sounds excellent. But just before I ask for some motion to that effect, it seems to me that this building size discussion in the short, medium, and long term splits into three parts. I think we still have sitting in front of us the fact that there is this erroneous text on a graphic, that we have a letter from Stewart saying it was a mistake, please take it out. I still think there is an impetus. The staff has recommended that we take it out. We see that we've not been enforcing it. So it seems like there's some impetus on us to deal with that and clean up the law under which we're asking everyone to live. Second, a continued discussion of building size. Like, I think you brought us an excellent report. The Chamber of Commerce has asked us to move slowly to consider this issue. Other speakers have said they can get us further reports from consultants, much like the one that we got from Jake Petrosky that was funded by a community group to add balance to this issue and make us more educated in it. So that's a medium-term issue. And then lastly, recommending that we begin this RFQ process for a movement to a form-based code. Does anyone else see the issue break down this way? Does this make sense to the other council members? I mean, I just feel like we clean our house, we keep learning, and then we make a movement toward a more overall fix and bringing into 2021 our ordinance so that it's more robust and it handles the situations, and there's not these gray areas and mistakes in it that we have to find out about in the middle of quasi-judicial hearings. So that's how I see it. So one question I have before we move forward, and just, generally we're going to ask to have more questions answered about building size limit. Like, please, interested members of the public, provide us with other reports. Please keep talking to us, people that are interested in this issue. But also, like, where are we, Heather, with this text amendment? Where are we in terms of where we left it off in our last motion and where we were in the public hearing?
where you are. I mean, it was tabled for this type of discussion and to continue to have this type of discussion. You asked me in particular at the break, is, what motion would have to be made to bring it back? Basically, a tabled motion is a motion to defer. If no action is taken on it in 100 days, it dies, and you can start over, with however you would want to bring it back. Within the 100 days, if you want to bring it back, you do need to do a motion to revive consideration. If that motion is approved, then you can begin that discussion again. I will tell you, that your planning staff and me have been working really hard on the 160D changes that you've heard from us for many times. Many meetings we've talked about it, and we're at that point where we really need to get that to you. We've been working hard on it, once or twice a week, sometimes 3 of us, sometimes 2 of us, but we've made a lot of progress and we're very close. And we could actually probably bring that to you in May. One of the roadblocks we've hit is what to do with the graphics, all the graphics in there, because it's not, this is the only error that we know of in the graphic, but a lot of them are wrong because changes have been made. And these graphics need to be updated altogether. So one thing to do is let us bring this back to you with the 160D changes and show you what it looks like.
So that'll be part and parcel with the 160D changes?
It will. I mean, it's something we weren't prepared to bring back and talk about tonight, but we can with regard to those changes at your next meeting. We really need to get those in front of you anyway. So that is the motion you asked. I wanted to answer that question from
Yes,
a
thank
legal
you.
basis for you, but also wanted to make that recommendation.
So it seems to me that we have a plan. Continue to look at this conditional zoning discussion with how our ordinance would look different than the Forest Hill ordinance. We're also going to look at these 160D changes in the next with the 5,000 square foot greater than or equal to air from the graphic. We'll look at that at the same time. We'll continue to learn about building size and floor area ratio, and people have the opportunity to bring more. Yeah, please.
Currently, there is no maximum building.
That's right.
Period, in country at all. But there's a graphic that says that.
Well, there's a graphic that says greater.
5,000, it doesn't say square feet.
Yeah,
It doesn't say-
so there's that air. So,
There is.
I mean, we could still pick back up. We could make a motion to pick that back up. If we would just like to get rid of that now and clean that up and handle the rest of the.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the plan. So we don't currently have a square footage maximum, but we need to fix several things in the ordinance, and we can look at that in the next meeting. We can continue to talk about conditional zoning, continue to talk about building size, but for right now, for that larger picture, what would you like? What would you advise us to make a motion to direct you to begin the process of looking at an RFQ for a movement of our ordinance to a form-based code?
Yeah, and I think it could just be, a motion to, direct staff to continue working, towards that. Again, still got to make, county's currently in their budgetary process where that's been discussed in those processes. So, but, a motion that would support staff continuing to, engage on this issue and moving to a form-based code and bringing and recodifying the ordinance.
Okay. So a motion to continue to work toward an RFQ for the movement of our ordinance to a form-based code. Could I get that motion from a member of the council, please? So this is directing staff to look into moving our ordinance out to a form-based code, out to bid, right? Like continue, just saying like, we do want to go in that direction.
And I think just the caveat that to move forward with that process, we've still got, before we go to the RFQ and bid, we also have to handle
Well, so you need to
the
come-
budgeting.
I mean, is it time for a motion or do you just need to continue to?
Well,
discuss this?
I think it's just, if we can get motion basically supporting the efforts of staff to move this issue forward
Okay,
would
the
be,
form-based code issue
yes,
forward.
to recodify the ordinances that this council is in
Recodify
support
the
of those
ordinance
efforts.
Toward a form-based code.
Yeah,
Okay.
that this body is
Supportive.
supportive of those efforts to do that.
All right. Could I get a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Mark, do you want me to restate that?
Motion to approve staff working towards a form-based code. And codifying?
Yeah, recodifying the ordinance to form-based.
Recodifying the ordinances.
Okay,
That
do I
works.
have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Thank you all very
Okay.
much.
All right, with that, if there's no other business, I'd like a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Yeah.
Seconded? Debbie seconds, all in